This is the Northern Ireland
Declare
Assembly
interest,
Senate Chamber.
switch off the
Programme
mobile
signed.
phone,
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber.
your tablet. Today's business, we are going to have a departmental briefing on the budget. The Permanent Secretary is coming. I want to allow more time on that today. Then we have a briefing from NITRA before the Permanent Secretary. Is that right? No, after the Permanent Secretary.
Yes,
Yep.
the Permanent
And then we have the informal close by close consideration on the rest of the road traffic amendment bill today. So apologies? Nope.
No
Okay, members. Yep. Chairperson's business. At page 5, members. 2.1, there is a draft invitation list. Members, you may recall that the Northern Ireland Environmental Link or Environment Link has asked if we would join them with for a New Year reception. We're hosting a reception, although they are paying for the course. So that's the list, members, there of the people from the sector and from DOE they would like to invite. There's some all-party group, I think, members they would like to invite as well. So there's quite a long list, about 160. So it's going to be in the Long Gallery. So we'll remind members there at the time. What day is that? Maybe
It's
just
Monday.
remind.
It's Monday
It's
the 12th of
Mon-
January.
Monday the 12th of
I
January.
mean, I presume if there's 160 being invited, we wouldn't anticipate anywhere near that or come because physically you couldn't.
No.
No, the Long Gallery standing you can get 200. Yeah.
Well, they have cleared it with
Yeah, I hope,
Yeah.
hope somebody's cracks open a few windows then on that basis.
Apparently, if everybody did accept, they can accommodate 160 people standing, but they're not
Yeah.
anticipating that everyone will accept an
No.
invitation.
So, yeah, and they invite a number of people in each organisation, and maybe
Okay.
each organisation may send one representative. So it's great to meet, and it's nice to meet up with the sector. Okay, then page 5, 2.2 item there, an invitation for me to speak at the 2015 NIREC conference. Last time, members, we advised you that we got this invitation, but it clashes with our meeting. But they've come back and said they can be flexible, that I can speak at a different time. So, members, if you're agreeable, I'm quite happy to go maybe immediately after our meeting here and speak at the lunch
Agreed.
afternoon meeting. Yeah.
Agreed. Yep.
Yeah. Members? Okay.
Order-
Barry's
order,
quick.
Chair.
Barry said yes. So others agree?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Yeah. It's a very important sector, obviously. If they're flexible, I'm happy to rearrange the time to go. Okay, the next one, 2.3, Metabolon visit report. Renew, the organisation which organised us to go to Metabolon. They have asked if we could publish our report. Members may remember Sheila wrote up a report of our visit, but they have requested if we should publish, if we could publish a report on our website. Members, I'm not too keen about that because it was just a record for ourselves rather than put it on the website as a piece of, for the public domain. What I wouldn't mind to do, if you agree, is we'll go back to them and say, if they want a quote from us about our visit, a couple of lines, I can give them a couple of lines rather than to publish. Peter, don't lick the knife.
Let me try to recycle.
It's dangerous.
In terms of what specifically they're actually publishing, type of thing, because I don't have a problem with the general report or something they publish that, but what is published directly in relation to ourselves? Because I have no problem with them publishing stuff about the visit. The only issue would be if they were looking to make quotations or something of that nature that we weren't happy with, or something of that nature. What are they not? Are they simply just?
What they have asked is if they can put a link on their website to the report, if it were to be published on our website. That would be all. I don't think they would be quoting it or using it in any one way, but it would be in the public domain and they would be able to refer to it, where it isn't at the moment.
I mean, unless there's a particular issue, I don't really see where that would be a massive problem in that, to be honest on it. But
Well, I'm easy. What do you think, members?
It's just it's quite a short report, and
Yeah.
it's fairly factual.
Wasn't a lot
Well,
of details in it.
Chair, it's descriptive, isn't it, of the visit?
That's right, it
Right.
is.
So I think there's no reason why that could not be presented publicly.
Okay, well, if members are happy with that, then we say yes, yep, okay. Then 2.4, okay, ministers' briefing, just to remind members that the minister's coming next week. Members have already agreed that we're going to talk about the road safety issues and the preparation for the transfer of planning to council. I think we need to to ask him about taxis as well. Peter and Cahill, probably would want to hear about,
yeah, Chair, I mean,
what's the
I
latest
think nothing
progress.
else. We need to see if, because obviously there does appear to be this dichotomy that stuff hasn't been put to us yet. Suggestion is they want everything in by January, and
Yes.
we seem to be on at best parallel roads, I suppose, in that regard on it. But I think at least just to get where we are.
We want clarity, really.
Yeah.
What's going on.
Don't we?
So, members,
Chair, could you
minutes.
touch on the strategic planning policy statement even briefly as well?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
The SPPS. Yep. Members, if you want any other items to include in the ones, the latest members have to tell you.
Just basically as soon as you possibly can, because we would liaise with the department and obviously advise the minister what the committee would like him to
Give
talk
him a
about. He
bit
may
of
have
time to
issues
prepare.
of his own, but
Yeah.
gives him a few days to do that. So
Okay, by
by
beginning of
close
next week.
Well, yes, really by close of play tomorrow, because we have to prepare the pack on Monday.
Okay.
I suppose we should make a brief reference to the wind energy inquiry and ask the department to take seriously our forthcoming recommendations, even a mention,
They have said they will.
Okay.
They've already given that assurance that they will. I'm not said they said they're going
No,
to agree with them,
I
but
suppose
they've
just to
said they're going to take it into
Barry's
account.
point in relation, I mean, I think it wouldn't do any harm just as a sort of, even if it's sort of written into the record as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, and
Yeah.
we acknowledge the fact that you have said this type of thing. It's
Yeah.
just because I presume, well, is the minister's bit private or is it Hansarded?
It would usually be Hansarded if we can get it Hansarded.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Hansard are very, very short-staffed. They were unable to accommodate us today in Hansarding our budget briefing.
I'm sorry, let me put this way, and I'm not saying you do things for
Possible,
effect, but I
yes.
think it's maybe useful to have something that is directly on the public record in that regard.
Also reflects a major area of work that we have undertaken in the last few months, gives it status or whatever.
Yes.
could I just
I mean, it's
ask,
going to be in public session,
Yeah.
so it'll be on record anyway, whatever he says. Sorry, Robin.
yes, just in relation to the briefing on the budget, I know it's not going to be Hansarded, but is it being recorded?
Yes, it is. All of our meetings were recorded.
Yes, so how would you get access to that then?
The Assembly, I think it's called Sound and Vision, can provide a DVD of the meeting any time that you want one.
Oh, I see, right, that's very good. Good to know. Thank you.
Okay, for future reference, yeah. Minutes is at page 13, members. You agree? The minute, are you content to agree?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Item 4, matters arising. There's a cover note, members, on page 20, and members, are you content to note items 4.3, 4.4 and 4.6? Okay.
Agreed.
Agree?
Agreed.
Good, thank you. Just to highlight a number of other items there. 4.2 is correspondence from NIRIC as a follow-up from its briefing to us, and that's at page 22, members. Members, are you content to include this information in our final committee report on inquiry into wind energy? They were not very happy with a slight kind of change in the SPPS in relation to the PPS 18. So, okay, members about in favour of development. Item 4.5 also is correspondence, and that's page 94. Correspondence from a Green Party representative regarding activities at the Daradian site in the Sparrian Mountains. Members, are you content if we send the correspondence to the department to ask their views?
Yep.
Okay. Then, if I can refer members to tabled correspondence from the department regarding the outcome of the consultation on draft PPS 22 on affordable housing, which sought views on introducing a system of developer contributions towards affordable housing through the planning system. A total of 53 responses were received to the consultation, which concluded on the 23rd of September 2013. Following the consultation, the Minister and the Minister for Social Development have agreed to carry out further research on economic impact of the various options for developer contribution schemes that could be implemented. Members, have you any views on it? I know when I was in DSD committee, that was talked about, and I think somehow we really missed a boat here with the building boom, housing boom at that time. Probably would have been a lot easier to get developers to contribute. We could have probably had a lot of contributions, from them at that time. But I think maybe the housing market's coming back. I think we need to start again on that. So, members, we just note this and really, and support them to make further to look further into the issue. Okay, members, right. The next item is consultation. You have a cover note there at page 101. So, members, have you any comments, or are you content to request a synopsis of responses on all these consultations?
Great.
Okay. Then, next item is synopsis of responses to the consultation on complying with the third driving license directive, and that's at page 165. Just want to bring it to your attention, members. The department carried out a consultation on changes to comply with the EU third driving licence directive to change the entitlement for drivers to drive a minibus with a trailer and to drive a damaged or defective bus to a place of repair, or to where it is being tested after a repair has been carried out. This consultation was carried out between 23rd of September 2014 and 21st October 2014 and received 11 responses. The majority of responses were supportive of the proposed changes. Members, are you content for the department to prepare this legislation?
Yep.
Okay. Content? Okay, next item 7. Again, that's in relation to consultation. There's a synopsis of responses then to the consultation on the draft local government standing order regulations, and that's at page 174. Members officials will be attending the committee meeting on the 4th of December to brief on outcome of this consultation. Members, it's just, are you content to note the synopsis in the meantime?
Yep.
Pending the oral presentation. Then next one is an SL1, that's item 8, at page 205. That's the smoke control areas exempt at fireplaces amendment number 20 and number 2 regulations NI 2014. We keep on getting these. Why can't they do it all together? So
There's no smoke without the department.
the purpose of this rule is to amend the provisions of the smoke control areas exempted fireplaces number 2 regulations NI 2013 to insert a number of additional fireplaces suitable for use in smoke control areas. The rule will be subject to the negative resolution and will come into operation in December 2014. Members, you content for the department to proceed with making the rule? Yep. Then, I'm going to bring forward to your attention a number of SL1s now, all relating to planning issues and the transfer of planning decisions to local councils. Members, obviously, if you want oral briefing on any of them, the departments have offered that they are very happy to come and brief members on separate SL1s if we would think it's appropriate. Yep.
Chair, just as regards to the planning side of things, I mean, I don't have any particular problem with the actual legislation. One thing, and I don't know whether other parties have got this as well, certainly at a little bit of insight into the DUP or whatever, but certainly at our conference on Saturday, Pam and myself were on panels dealing with local government, but particularly the big issue, clearly because it's come down, was planning. Mm-hmm. And one area, and as I said, this doesn't entirely tie in with the legislation, but maybe the way things have been delivered, there seemed to have been a reasonable level of discontent with what was there in terms of training of councillors, that with the best will in the world, the department had come in various areas. Now, I think it was acknowledged it was a little bit variable depending upon what area you were in, but that essentially councillors were complaining that they went along, they got a series of presentations with slideshows, and that if you like, it wasn't hands-on enough. And
so what they expected, yeah.
Oh, sorry?
Wasn't what they expected.
Well,
yeah.
I think the problem on it is that where I think there maybe would be stronger in whether we can push the department a little bit in this was grand in terms of presentations and that type of thing, but almost, and whether this is perhaps more appropriate as we move closer to planning, was that whether they wanted sort of more be it sort of like sort of mock examples where effectively it was almost done like in a shadow form, where they would, maybe go through as if it was real and actually face the real issues as they would face on the ground, rather than essentially just get a lecture on things on it.
Right.
But there was a considerable discontent with the level of training that was being made available, and in many ways people still feeling that in many ways, from a practical point of view, they were essentially being left to sink or swim. And I'm a bit concerned with the combination of it, and obviously related to that then you've got the code of conduct. I think it is still probably not sunk in well enough with people as to where the demarcation lines are between being on the committee, what representations you can receive if you're a councillor, what you'll need to declare, etc., on it. And I have a horrible feeling that whatever political hue or none type of thing, who actually will walk into mistakes and do that. And I think there is a question mark over the level of preparation. I don't know whether we can do anything to that or suggest that to the department, or whether if there's information coming back when they're talking about the legislation on that side, I think that's a point that could be made. But I think, I don't know whether other parties have had a similar.
Well, probably can talk to the minister next week. Just ask them about the capacity in building in training. Who are they sending and?
I think to be fair, it's not. I think to be fair, I don't think they want to personalise it in terms of saying, well, this official's been poor. They've been, I think it's the fact that the nature of the training,
yes,
in one sense, isn't entirely fit for purpose, because it's not enough practical.
Well, they were supposed to send their own planners out to train, because
my understanding is, I think in some cases, one of the things we got back was that where it was, say, a local person dealing with. Maybe it was a planner dealing within the council itself or whatever, sometimes their practical stuff was better than what was coming down directly from the DOE in that regard. But there is a concern out there. There's still a reasonable gap on that bit, and Robert's going to hit the track very quickly, and with this coming through.
Sure. Beginning of April, Pam?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously it's a daunting scenario for the new councillors, the whole planning
Yeah.
There's such huge changes and
Big
and
responsibility.
for those councillors who
Yeah.
have been elected to the new councils who have been there for a long time, it's going to be an even bigger change. And I think one of the most important words came out of certainly what we heard at the weekend was that they found most of what they'd heard was irrelevant, which is not in any way useful at this stage, and as time's going by very quickly, and they obviously need as much support and relevant training as possible. So, yeah, I think it would be good actually to
Maybe
raise that
talk to
directly with the Minister.
Yeah, people want practical help.
You've experienced
Yes.
You know, kind of a guide of step by step how to go about doing
Like
things. Is
walking
there
them
what
through
they
the
want?
process,
Yeah. Bring out some case studies or
need
that
that.
they can do it and try it out. Yeah. Okay. Carol, yes.
No, thanks, Chair. And I know that talking to some other people, some of them have found it okay, but I think there should be a two-part exercise in terms of learning the policy and the criteria and everything going forward. But also, I agree with Peter in terms of a proper reenactment of a, example of exactly how you would go about making the.
Yeah, I think if you almost had like a planning meeting with like a fictitious
Exactly.
planning agenda,
Yeah, a case study.
I think like a practical example like that there would be.
as close to real
Yes.
life as probably with a couple of potentially tricky situations where people can then see.
Yeah, talk people through the whole process, how to go about it. And, we mentioned that to the Minister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the
Yes,
visit,
yes,
the visit
Ian.
that councillors went on to Scotland, that's what they did there. They had a reenactment of the whole planning, a session of planning where councillors and planners and applicants and all were in the one room. So those councillors should have all that information back with them.
Yeah, although again, to be fair, and again, this is where I think, to be fair, councillors can get caught. You're in a situation where you can't best will in the world if you're doing some sort of reenactment. Again, it's still in a different jurisdiction. You want to really do it as real life situations here. But also with that, by definition, you can only send a small number of councillors there. And even we saw, to be fair, when it was sent over, you then get the inevitable criticism of here people, so it's, to be fair, the councillors I think sometimes are left in a no-win situation in that regard. Yes. But it's the fact actually that's something that needs to permeate to all the councillors rather than just a sort of representative.
Yeah.
I think,
but training and capacity building has been promised to them. This money for that change.
Chair, I understand that, but it doesn't actually prepare the people exactly what's going to happen. And I was for raising the reservation in terms of training today, and I do believe what's discussed here today is the way to go forward. There's an expectation from the general public out there when councils takes over that they're going to be making these decisions for them. So, that's another element, but I'm just raising the awareness today.
Yeah, no. It's essential they feel equipped that they can do the job, properly. Okay, members. Pam.
sorry, Chair, just to come back and say that I think it's really imperative that all the councillors should be trained up in the planning, not just those who will be sitting on the planning committees, because they need to know how and when and what scenarios they can actually take representations from their own constituents as well, because there's such a massive change in the whole system. I think it's important that they're not just encouraged but almost requested that I think it should actually be compulsory that all the councillors should actually undergo.
Because ultimately it will go to the council for ratification.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I suspect, well, I might be wrong, but would it not be the planning effective with delegated powers?
Might have it,
I assume on that basis that it wouldn't then require ratification of the council. I might be wrong on that, but I presume that's probably the likely.
Okay.
We could clarify that.
Okay. Right. So the first SLI, SL1. The first SL1,
Long year.
Oh, is the Planning 2011 Act, commencement number 2 order, page 209. Members, the purpose of this rule is to bring into operation Part 3 of the 2011 Act. Commencement orders are not usually, as members you're well aware, required to be laid before the Assembly, but this was inserted in the Act at consideration stage by the then Environment Committee. Carol was responsible for this, is that right, Carol?
That's right, Chair.
The provisions in Part 3 of the Act will cover a range of planning control powers, and the committee's amendment was to ensure that appropriate governance measures were in place when the responsibility for planning transfers to councils. So the rule will be subject to the draft affirmative resolution and will be laid as soon as possible. Members, would you want a briefing before we tell the department that we are content?
That would be useful, Chair, I think.
Yeah, just particularly for the ones who were not involved in that one in the early stages. Okay. Happy? Right, we asked for a briefing from the department then, members. Okay, before we agree to the SL1 to go forward. The next one is SL1, on page 216, and that's the Planning General Development Procedure Order. The purpose of the order is to put neighbourhood notification on the statutory basis, requires statutory consultee to respond substantively within a specified time frame, enable councils to agree non-material changes to planning permission, and require designs and access statements to accompany planning applications. The rule will be subject to the negative resolution and is proposed to come into operation on the 1st of April. Members, again, I think quite a lot of issues there. Would you like a briefing, or you think these are all very, very, I think, good new measures?
Yeah. Well, Chair, I'm just looking ahead, and some of the other ones definitely, I think they, at item 12, would probably want a briefing.
Yeah.
Potential
Well, I think
so it might be useful just to have a briefing on each of them, if they're
okay.
coming in anyway.
Okay. Yeah, members. Okay. Yeah. The next one is the planning development management. Again, fairly complicated. So a lot of new measures in it. So we asked for a briefing too. Then on that, the next one. So
briefing all three of them.
on all three of them. The next one is a general regulations. I think that's fairly straightforward, members. The purpose of it is to allow for an application for planning permission by a council itself or by a council jointly with another person to be determined by that council unless the application is called in by the department under section 29 of the 2011 Act.
Chair, I definitely think we need a brief on that one.
You want a briefing on that?
Well, because of,
Okay.
but perceived conflict of interest there, so I think it would be
Okay. All
good
right.
to hear what the...
Well, if our deputy chair wants it, we shall have it. Okay, next item then is item 13, evidence session on the budget for 2015-2016. Members, at page 274, you have a cover note from our clerk, details and about the details, and then there's page 278 is a budget scrutiny timeline. Then a briefing paper from the Assembly Research is at page 280. The departmental briefing paper has been tabled, members. So that's this one. Okay. And if I can welcome Leo O'Reilly, Permanent Secretary Anthony Carlton, Director of Finance and Suvondinge Finance and Business Planning Division. So maybe if it's a very good paper, I managed to read it. So I know it's just tabled for members to look at. Maybe if you can walk us through. Well, thank you for preparing a very good paper. You have every sympathy from me. I was just so angry reading it. I'm sure you all are. So if you can talk us through this, Leo, and you can then maybe ask questions from answer questions from members.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can just repeat briefly the apology and the timing of this, but we were and indeed are to some extent still still trying to work out a final scenario on this, which is why the paper came unduly late to the committee. And if you want us to come back at any time at another stage, if you want to follow up on this once people have had a chance maybe to look at it in more detail. Part of the difficulty is every department's different, and every department's finances are different, and the way they're funded is different. So the problem is always how do you try to explain what this means in what you hope might be a way that most people, apart from a few finance specialists, would understand. So what we've tried to do is sort of take it through in a sort of logical sequence, which starts off with basically which talks about the draft budget proposals, which basically starts off with where the key number in the DFP document is the 103.7, which is the net DEL allocation to the department for next year in the draft budget. Then, having taken that figure, we then started first of all to say, well, first of all, the first thing we have to do with that money is transfer some of it out to local government in respect of the transfer of planning functions and also some associated environmental responsibilities. So that's how you get to Table 2, which shows the figures we will transfer out to local government for planning and for some environmental functions. We just make the point in Para 7 that, of course, the councils will also get the money we currently receive for planning receipts, which we estimate will be 12.6 million next year. So that revenue will leave the department and will transfer into local government for them to pay the staff we transfer across and other functions we transfer across to them. We then come to the issue of local government grants, and again we explained that there was a baseline allocation which was reduced. I suppose this is one of the core issues in the budget is the treatment of these, particularly these two sizable grants that we pay over to local government. In the case of one derating grant, we don't really have any discretion because it's a statutory-based grant and it's based on specific rating reliefs. So in a sense, the number is actually fixed by a formula, and until the statutory formula is changed, to some extent, there is an obligation to actually pay the money across local government. There's a separate then rate support grants, which is variable, but as we mentioned, is designed, as most members will know, to support councils that have relatively lesser levels of revenue compared to other councils. So that's the issue of the grants. And that gets us then to the balance of funding shown in Table 3. Then, of course, we highlight we do receive income, the department for various activities, fees, and we've allocated our estimated receipts therein at the 20.8, and with some more detail in Annex A. So that then leaves us with a balance of money to spend, 28 to 80.5 million. Then we've in paragraphs.
Can I interrupt for a second here? Just so I'm clear, just on one point. There's obviously a reference to the reduction in terms of the grants on the 15% side of things. I understand that. That's in line, obviously, with the overall reduction side of it. Mm-hmm. I understand that. I mean, there's obviously, in theory, there's at least a degree of variability. Where then applied back in, if there's additional allocations of 2 million that were specifically, whenever it was agreed, was on the basis for local government, where are those put back into the figures, or where are they?
They're back in. They're later on.
Maybe you're coming to that.
It's paragraph 18 of the paper.
Okay. So those are sort of like I wouldn't say rebalancing, but at least it starts to move in a little bit in that direction, and that sort of it in terms of what's right. Okay.
Income specified then, paragraph 12. So we add that back in again because that's money we anticipate we'll have to spend next year. And then we go down. How would we spend that money that's left? The first thing we highlight, obviously, are staff salary costs, because that's the largest single item that we spend that out of the money we've left. We just highlight there the key issues. We've obviously this year, with the reductions, already started to reduce numbers of staff in the department through the measures mentioned in paragraph 14. We just mentioned there we currently also have up to 120 staff still in the department who are left from the vehicle licensing function based primarily in Coleraine. We're currently running an voluntary early exit scheme, which hopefully will mean that most of all, if not all of those staff will have gone by the 31st of March. would be a difficulty if they didn't go, because at the moment the DVLA and Swansea are funding them, but they've said they won't fund them after March next year. Then, of course, as I've mentioned earlier, we're moving 400 or so planning and related staff to local government on the 1st of April, and we've taken account of the money we need to transfer across to local government to pay for those staff. And therefore, that means you end up with a balance of staff in the department at the start of next year, excluding DVA testing staff, because they're funded separately through the trading fund, of 1560, we estimate. Then in paragraph 16, I mean, in order, we estimate that really to stabilise the department's medium-term financial position, we need to aim towards releasing about 500 up to around 500 staff in the department, which would, in the medium term, release, we estimate, about £16 million of our costs, and we may come back to that later.
16
million. Yep. We then list other costs, which are then detailed at Annex B, which are, it's a diverse range of things, but they're the costs that are associated with running sort of the department and what it does and staff it employs, assuming we have around about the 1560 staff in place at the beginning of the financial year. And it also assumes that country parks, nature reserves will remain open and will be staffed at a basic level to provide basic facilities for services. Then to come back to Mr Weir's question, as well as the 2 big grants we paid to local government, there's a miscellaneous range of other grants which cover, going back to this if necessary, construction products, emergency planning, air quality, listed buildings, waste recycling, a whole diverse range of grants that we pay across local government. So what we've used the £2 million that was allocated in the draft budget to offset reductions to local government grants. We've allocated that money to offset some of those reductions at the moment planned in local government grants. That then brings you finally just to paragraph 19, which shows then how much is left after we allocate out, set out in table 5, those various spending assumptions for next year. We also then just flag up separately, we do of course then also have carrier bag levy receipts, and that funding, as you know, is used to fund environmental programmes, and that money will still be there next year, and so that funding will be available is at the moment for the various primarily community-based environmental programmes that it funds at the moment, so that money is there for that purpose. Briefly mention the capital budget. It isn't, in global terms, it's not a large capital budget. A significant amount of it is actually earmarked for a replacement IT system for driver licensing. Should be a comment in there, waste management, capital grants and other capital grants at the moment. And maybe further questions on that. We've also, as the budget notes, a large block of money in there, 50.5 million financial transactions capital, which is a special sort of capital which we can discuss as necessary, but it's earmarked for a specific project associated with the ARC21 waste management group, a specific energy from waste plant. Then the final part of is just then says, look, taking account of all that, what do we end up with at the moment? And as I said, if you go back to table 5, you see it's a balance of 1.2 million. If you just leave that sitting there, we then have highlighted in paragraph 23 all the various things that we do at the moment, the services we provide, the other expenditures we have that simply won't have any money next year at the start of April. Nothing allocated to those things at all. So that would obviously have quite a significant impact, and particularly both on what we can do and what we can cover, but also because of the nature or wide-ranging nature of our grants programmes, that would impact obviously on current organisations and bodies out there that currently receive those grants, and that ranges from everything from universities down to small local community groups. So that's the.
Sorry, just to clarify through the chair. I mean, saying from paragraph 23. So we're saying here, besides the list of groups you have on page 9 and 10 there, are we talking about road safety as well?
At the moment, yeah.
It's at A.
I see at 1.8. So in total, how much is that, sir?
Road safety, or
Right across the board, if you want to fund them groups, the grants, all them grants listed, the whole lot, what total are we looking at?
Oh.
If you weren't to, if you had no money for funding all of that?
Well, yeah. 1, 2.
It's in and around about 6 million.
Yeah.
That's the shortfall.
Depends how you add those numbers up. But,
Right, no, that's...
we'll come back to that. But just to finish, I'll be quiet then. I'll not keep quiet, I'll answer your questions. Gosh, there was a final point I was going to make now. I've forgotten about that. Sorry. Just the final point was we're proposing, after this hearing this morning, we're proposing to put this on our departmental website this afternoon, just because every department has been asked to put their assessment of the budget implications for them, and this, in the course of this week, as you've seen, various departments are now beginning to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Leo, it's certainly a budget that is just almost impossible for the department to try to administer for next year. I'm sure members all have lots of questions to ask you, but if I can just start to ask you about staffing. So you're saying you are thinking of reducing 500 staff, and that may save £16 million.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay. Have you any direct control over who is going to take this redundancy package? I know OFMDFM has put forward this voluntary redundancy scheme. So, I mean, can you say, you want which department to go, and is that a priority on that?
Just briefly on that, as indeed the Finance Minister has spoken about this week publicly, and he's mentioned there is a lot of work being done centrally by DFP on a civil service-wide scheme, because this would have to be managed centrally for all departments. I mean, on the specific point about quotes who might go, the previous redundancy programmes, voluntary redundancy programmes that we've run in this department, for example, where respective planners, for example, we knew exactly how many we wanted to go, and we knew the grades because we knew what our objective was. In this instance, it's almost the other way around. It's just we need to save money, and almost therefore anyone who wants to avail of the scheme would be allowed to avail of the scheme, because the primary objective is to reduce costs as quickly as possible. And so I suspect in practice what will happen is a scheme or schemes will be launched, people will express an interest from across all departments. Once those numbers begin to come together, people will know which, we will know, every department will know how many of our people want to go, and in a sense then you start reverse managing it, as it were, because once you know where the people are going, then you'll be able to say where the gaps would be in the organisation, how you'd fill those. But the primary driver is not an HR restructuring as it was with planning. It's just literally to save money, full stop, and that's the driver.
Yeah, and the proportion is going to be huge for your department, because you're talking of actually, after planners going and DVA staff going, you're only going to be left with 1,560 staff. And then you have to cut another 500 staff out of it. So that's 1/3 of the remaining staff.
Yeah.
So no one will feel safe, really, in DOE anymore.
Yeah.
And how is it going to impact the running of your organisation, of the department and services?
Yeah. I mean, we've been giving some preliminary thought to this, but it's a pretty big question. I mean, in a sense, what this sort of exercise forces you to do is you have to state the obvious. You have to stand back and say, what are we doing, and what's important? And it will, in a sense, everything we do is of importance, some value, but that's not uniform. So you have to start to say, stand back strategically and say, what is it that we do and what's really, really important? And I mean, for example, we're still developing our thinking, but what is really important? There's lots of things we do that are good, but what's really important, I think personally, and my colleagues as well, this has not been washed through ministers or anything yet, but environmental regulation and protection is very important. I mean, we have the big stories for the last year, 2 years. You have the Boy landfill site, you have concerns around Lough Neagh, you have other where there is, put it this way, there is scope for improvement in the way the systems and we and other departments do in regulation and protection. So if we say, you know, you can start off and say those are the really important things. So that's where you want to protect the funding and perhaps even direct more funding into those sorts of activities. But the implication then is, well, what will not be, you know, we provide a lot of grants for very good programmes and desirable programmes, everything. You know, you mentioned them, eco schools, other activities. Now, however, we do have, as I mentioned, still got the carrier bag revenue money, which is sort of circa £4 million a year. If we continue to use that,
are you sure you can get £4 million? Because last year you didn't get £4 million.
I know, but it's getting better. It's good. There's more coming in.
Okay, people are slipping back in the habits.
Reconcile themselves to paying this money.
Advertising campaign to encourage people to bad behaviour.
So, well, I mean, yeah, you're at one level, of course, or we should be objecting to have a zero income from carrier bag levy. Would be, you might say, from one point of view. But since, you know, the scheme is there, it's been set up, it's been put in place legally, the money is there, so we have to use it. And that, to some extent, will allow us. It won't replace all the other grants, but at least it will, you know, with very careful use of that money. And as you all know, sometimes that sort of seed funding, community groups, etc., you can get an awful lot for very little input, or relatively little input. You can get a lot of
volunteer hours. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the second strand of what we're thinking about at the moment. Obviously, we need to maintain core services. We have to continue to issue people with driver licences. As I mentioned, part of our capital spend next year is to replace the current driver licensing IT systems, which are a bit of a hodgepodge, to be honest with you, at the moment. But if we get that capital investment, that will allow us to run that systems more efficiently. So, if you work out the things you have to do and the things that are really important, although ultimately that's a political judgment, you can begin to see how you might manage this. Now, it's going to have very significant adverse impacts, obviously, in certain things we do at the moment. But it's would be, as we said, very difficult, but it's not impossible. And you know, other departments are facing equally challenging and difficult decisions for different reasons.
Yeah. And we also have to bear in mind about other directives as well.
Yeah.
If you don't do things right,
which brings me
you
back
could
to
then
my
end up
protection
then
and
having facing infraction proceedings and fines. And
which brings me back to my point about we do need to really refocus ourselves on our protection, environmental protection.
What about the programme of government or the targets you have to meet? Are you going to miss any of those targets, you think?
Well, as you know, the current programme for government ends at the end of 2015. Is it next?
Yeah, well, we're doing a one-year one.
Oh yeah, it ends at the end of the current one ends at the end of this year. Yeah. And I think there's proposals to bring forward a subsidiary set of targets for next year, but I understand those haven't yet been agreed.
They haven't been finalised.
Keep me right here. Haven't been finalised, but but that's because people.
There must be new targets.
Yeah.
2015, 16.
I would think so.
Yeah. There'll be new targets.
Yeah.
I mean, our targets are. We won't get into the targets at the moment, but.
Yes, I mean all the targets on
with the various targets.
Targets on renewable energy, on cutting emissions, you know, climate change, all those.
Well, the climate change one it's linked in, as you know, to new 2020 targets, so we'd also need to look at that again in the slightly medium term. Carrier bag levy is going to be finished in January once we put in place the final piece of the jigsaw, so that target will be complete. Local government will be complete with your, provided you're able to help us on that and putting the final stuff through, so that one will be complete. Waste recycling has been, as you know, falling behind a bit on our incremental targets, but interestingly it has picked up during the last quarter. That will better be careful with it. Statistics being published yet. They have been. Yes, because they're official statistics, but I mean we are making a bit of, not we, local government is making more progress there. So we again, we know where we are and what has to be done there. And I don't think, we'll try to seek to continue to support local government. possible in OC.
Okay, I'll let other members come in. I have probably other questions to ask you at the end if they haven't touched on a number of other things I want to ask you about the capital as well. We have Colin first. Yep.
Sure, thanks for the presentation, Leo. I was going to say there's a couple of things I'm concerned about, but I'm concerned about all of it. I think you're in a fairly impossible position given the cut that you have to your budget. Just can I ask you maybe about a couple of specifics? The rate support grants, which are specific to poorer councils, which happen to be in and around my neck of the woods and west of the Ban, unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons. I'm just trying to work out what impact that's going to have on councils there. And road safety, what are we looking at in real terms around the impact of that cut?
I mean, the figure work on road safety is sorry, apologies. The figure work on rate support grants is set out in paragraph 8, which shows the opening position. You can see at the start of the year from last year was 18, and the figure that's being paid in the current year is 18.3 million. And if you apply the 15.1% reduction to that, it's a reduction of 2.8 million to that grant. So basically, that would be spread out across the eligible councils.
Have you had any discussions with them as to what that would mean in terms of their cutbacks then?
Not any in-depth discussions because it's only relatively recently that we've actually alerted local government to the potential for these reductions. I can come back to why that is in a minute. So we haven't had any. We've said to local government chief executives that there's a possibility that this grant in particular could be reduced next year, and the reduction there of 2 point would be spread out across the eligible councils.
Councils that need it most.
The councils, yeah, and the precise number of councils will change obviously with local government reorganisation on the 1st of April. On the second question you asked about the road safety, the 1.8 figure we quote there at the moment is, there's 1.2 spent on...
No, 1.8 is the current year budget.
Yeah, but there's 0.5 of that is for the development of a new plan. You just take that out and go down to core advertising, 1.3, isn't that right? There's no money at the... Well, there's the 1.2, but at the moment we're just sitting with that at the moment to see what sort of response we get from the committee and to others as to what the best levels of concerns are. But obviously you could perhaps put some money back into that, for example, for road safety. There's a debate goes on, as you know, as to what's the most effective way to spend road safety money and road safety programme money. Is it TV advertising? And there's a debate bats back and forward sometimes here as to what's the most. Is it education in schools? Is it other forms of raising awareness? Is it working, for example, as we do with the Young Farmers Clubs and the GAA on rural communities? Because as you all know, most deaths on road are primarily young drivers on rural roads. That sounds simplistic, but that is where the core problem is.
But TV adverts will reach the largest audience, there's no doubt about it. Have you empirical evidence on how effective TV campaigns are?
There's been various studies, as you would imagine, given the scale of spending. There was one done a few years ago by Oxford Economics, which worked out an attributable figure. I suppose the example, the best empirical example for me is, you can say, oh, how do you know it's the roads advertising and it's not better designed cars or better designed roads, or people are just being more careful anyway, or driving test examiners are better, or
combinations.
There's a myriad of things you could. That's only a few things. The one example I think is perhaps illustrates where road safety advertising was effective was wearing seatbelts, because beginning of the 1990s we had one of the lowest rates in Europe of people who actually wore their seatbelt when they were supposed to wear them, and that has changed dramatically. We're now amongst the highest. And when you think about it, the design and technology of a seatbelt has never changed, but people do wear them now. So maybe other reasons, but that was cited to me as an example.
Can I just ask Leo, just as a follow-up, in real terms, so we know what the money is. But what is that actually going to mean? So you've spelled out all the things that you do, but have you any work done on what's getting cut? Is it the advertising? Is it work with the GA and young farmers, or is there any work done on what that actually is going to mean in real terms for people?
Well, I mean, to answer your question simply, at the moment, in the scenario that's here, there is no money allocated for any of those activities. I mean,
I just want to get that right.
Just to be transparent about the point, at the moment. Now, the other thing I would say is this is still developing. Obviously, we haven't stopped yet looking at other ways we can save money, and there's obviously a significant imperative on us to cut back wherever possible in other areas where, even though we say we think we have to spend this money, if there's any scope at all to continue to do that, and then to have a process where, given the extreme circumstances we're in, if there's a consensus emerges as to what it is we should be seeking at least to put some more money into, then we can seek to do that, following your responses and other responses.
Okay. Pam?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just on the subject of waste and waste reduction, and obviously there's a legal requirement under the Waste Framework Directive at Article 29, and I'm just wondering what impact will the proposed cuts have on projects such as Rethink Waste Fund, which are providing grants for waste, for projects to divert waste from landfills.
Yeah, I mean, there's the grant programmes that you refer to there would be incorporated in the balance of 7.1 million figure that's referred to there, and so therefore there is potentially some scope to continue to pay the grants we pay to, particularly to councils at the moment, for waste infrastructure, as you know, recycling centres, that sort of thing. So there would probably, yes, there will still be some funding stream for that activity. The other big issue I've mentioned in here, but is the financial transactions capital allocation. Now, at the moment, as we say, that's earmarked against a specific project. However, it's not inconceivable that if other projects came forward that have the characteristics that you need to qualify to use that money, which is essentially has to be a private sector led or certainly non-public sector led development, then you can access financial transactions capital, which effectively provides, I don't want to use a terminology because it can be misleading, but cheap loan finance to developers who may not otherwise be able to access finance to develop these facilities. So it's earmarked at the moment for that, but certainly if other proposals came forward to us to use that money in a different way or waste infrastructure in different shapes or formats, we would be very open to it.
Okay, well, that's useful because I was just going to come on to that, because obviously we're well aware of the R21 the planning approval they're seeking from Mollusk, and obviously South Antrim Rep, I'm against that. But I was going to ask, was that money was that earmarked, for the R21 Waste Management Group? Is that reliant on approval being got at Mollusk, or are there other identified sites available?
The answer to your both questions.
Because obviously the planning approval is with the Minister.
As a department, we have to some Chinese walls in the sense that the planning approval issue has to be kept discreet and decided solely on its planning merits. If we tried to, if there was an inference that we'd quote, say, given planning approval because we'd got this big chunk of money that we had to spend, then that would lead us into difficult territory. So, but it's still subject to it's still the planning process, as you know, is still underway there. It hasn't been completed yet in relation to that planning application. So,
can I ask another way then? Are you aware of any other proposed sites start to
Yeah,
be
the second question was, at the moment, we're not aware of any specific proposals. There's as you know, there's a number of, there's one specific other proposal, which is obviously the Bombardier site. But my understanding, careful here because of commercial and confidence issues, but my understanding is that it's not anticipated that that project would wish to or need to access the financial transaction capital mechanism, put it that way. But obviously, if someone come forward with a proposal, we would want to look at it very carefully.
Okay, and again, on waste, how will the cuts or the reductions in staff impact on any work being done in relation to the reduction of waste and working with, or what work is being done to work with manufacturers in relation to the likes of packaging and reducing that? The two areas of work are environmental policy division within the department has a significant responsibility for waste and waste policy, and that also includes things like packaging, although that tends to be largely driven by EU legislation and directives in terms of what packaging should or should not be. They also deal, obviously, in policies, for example, on things like waste tyres, which is an area of concern. But the other side of the department that works a lot on this waste management stuff is, of course, the NIEA and the waste teams there, who increasingly are working both with councils in terms of the waste strategy, but also working with the private sector who want to work. Their definition often very keen to reduce their waste outgoings or indeed waste arising completely. So they work along with the private sector as well, and that work's continuing. And as I say, can never say never, but certainly, in my view, we need to maintain a strong priority on that area of work of waste regulation enforcement in the department. Okay, so and finally, for me anyway, on the staffing and the plan to reduce the staff by a third. What are the department's main concerns? Obviously it's a massive reduction in staff.
Yeah.
What is it going to impact on within the department to the greatest extent? I mean, in terms of concerns, obviously there's a concern for the people who this message has been directed to, and there's been a number of communications generally with staff in the civil service issued by the head of the civil service over the last couple of months, just saying to people, there are difficult issues to be addressed here. As the chair asked me earlier, as I explained, this is intended to be and is a voluntary exit scheme. So therefore, in a sense, once the detail of the scheme is devised by officials in DFP and approved by the executive, then it will be put to people. So in a sense, it will be their choice, because it's meant to be voluntary, to avail of the scheme. So in a sense, we would hope that the impact on individuals will be limited. However, the impact then on the business, to some extent, will only really become apparent once we know where the holes are, as it were, in the organisation. But what the intention would be, that we anticipate this will not sort of happen overnight. It'll be a gradual process, and it probably won't all happen during the next financial year. We will want to restructure and redeploy the remaining staff out of lower priority activities into higher priority activities, and to some extent we're doing that already in the department, because we're not filling any posts at all at the moment, not bringing any new people into the department. Do you as a department have any indication of where those holes might be? You must have some kind of indication, maybe age ranges or whatever. Yeah, maybe I should. Department of where actually those applications might come from for the voluntary exit scheme.
Well, the only analysis really is at this level is coming from the centre, and the voluntary, just by its very nature and with the way the compensation scheme is run, they're expecting those employees who are 58 and above would be most likely, because it's potentially a 21-month salary scheme, and then also a lot of at AO and AO level, or AO and AA level, potentially again because of the attractiveness to that age bracket. But it would really be, I think, for officers who have 35 years service and above, and that's why they think that age bracket is probably going to be in and around 58.
Yeah.
And what would happen then is, I mean, we wouldn't expect to see 500 voluntary redundancies from the Department of Environment, but we would expect to see a number to go from other departments, and then we would be exiting. We would have to exit some of our officers to fill their gaps, and that's how it would meet.
I mean, to quote you a figure on your point about age, I think I'm right in saying, I think the latest figure is there are 1,600 people in the Northern Ireland Civil Service aged over 60. You know, so if you start with an assumption that perhaps those people might be more keen to take up the opportunity of retiring, you know, you've got half your, I think the 3,000 targets in the public, you've got half your 3,000 target already. So there's various views around and opinions. You know, it's one of these things everybody has an opinion on, and all opinions.
But that's for all civil servants.
Yeah.
1,600
for all civil servants.
Yeah.
There's 1,600.
But you have
aged over
12
60.
departments and.
Yeah. The other issue for us, and particularly for our department, is of course it's not just the age profile, but the professional profile of the staff, because you know quite a large proportion of our staff aren't conventional civil servants. You know, administrative grades. A lot of them are P&T grades, scientific staff. Obviously, at the moment, a lot of them are planners, but most of those will have gone on the 1st of April. So, to some extent, that's taken out of the equation. But there are quite a lot of scientific staff, particularly, obviously, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and so there'll be an issue there about not just about the age, but also who are these schemes targeted at in terms of professional groupings, as well as just the admin grades in the department.
You really have no idea what problems you may face until you see the outcome of
not at that detailed granular level, but
you're saying you could lose very specific members of staff who
oh yeah, I mean
quite specialised.
Yes, and I mean, as I said earlier to the chair, the driver being financed, you know, other than there's, you know, for example, there may be some issues around IT staff because across the service because we're not well supported. You know, those grades may in fact be excluded from a redundancy scheme specifically because the service as a whole can't afford to lose those IT staff, because that's the one area of professional staff where there's quite still very strong demand in the external market for people with those skills.
And finally, are you confident that the numbers required to come forward for the voluntary exit scheme will come forward?
I couldn't say I'm confident. I think to some extent there's you know, you do hear talk about people will be rushing to take up the scheme. I think to some extent some of that may be based on staff's folk memory of how these schemes used to operate, which were pretty generous in terms of the compensation that are available for people. But I mean, over the last couple of years, the schemes have been radically changed, very dramatically changed, initially by the Treasury in London, and then that has been followed through locally. So the benefits available are not remotely like what they used to be. So, but people won't be aware of that until they see the detail of the scheme, and they have to work out what would this mean for me. So it may not be just as strong a take-up as perhaps some staff believe there could be.
Okay.
And it's unlikely for it to happen right away anyway. You take
it won't. No. 6
months, you know, a year to have all of that 500 staff released.
The internal working assumption is that people won't start leaving the system in any sort of numbers until at least October-ish 2015.
Yeah. And then all that time you still have to pay the staff salary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have to pay people,
Okay, Pam?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Can I just pick up the point that Pam mentioned? The Act 21. I know this is the new thing from OFMDF and the financial transactions capital.
Yeah.
Is it not a bit presumptuous to say that 50 million will go towards the Act 21 project? I mean, they are still waiting for planning approval. And I know this money, if you don't use it in that financial year, it will go, is that right? It will have to be handed back to Treasury.
Northern Ireland has a specific tranches of money over the next few years from this Treasury fund,
Okay, have you a plan B if Act 21, say, can't get the planning approval or may not be able to use the money within next year?
I mean, on your question, is it presumptions? It's certainly not presumption. It's the planning point is not. We're not presuming anything on planning because we cannot. That has to be determined on planning grounds. But it's not presumptions in the other sense because it is ARC 21 itself, and working along with the Strategic Investment Board has come forward with this proposal.
Okay.
They have brought forward this proposal for the use of financial transactions capital.
Is it going to put pressure on planners that they have to approve this?
No, that's my concern. I mean, we have to be very clear that it cannot and will not.
Okay. Well, we'll hear from you here.
Yeah.
Okay. Others? Carol?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you very much for your presentation. I have to accept the papers tabled today. We'll get into more detail again once I get time to study. But just there's a few initial concerns, obviously. See, in terms of our PFG targets, could you just outline briefly how these changes will impact on our original government targets?
If I can remember, I'll try to remember most of it off the top of my head, and Siobhan, right. She keeps me right on these generally anyhow. I mean, on the targets, our key PFG targets, local government, well, the committee knows where we are with that one, local government reform, and we don't anticipate any of this will affect that programme. Now,
right now, because we'll go through them very quickly, see in terms of, because we believed, or this committee supported sort of ring-fencing monies for the transfer, to support local government through that transition, so we're happy enough.
We have done that. I am content that the figures we quote in there, which includes the 6.6 plus obviously the revenue receipts as well, reflects the functions that we are transferring across local government. There are, obviously, it's not just our department, other departments are involved in transferring functions as well, and there's still some discussion going on as to what the final figures there will be. But I'm speaking just
as far as our
functions we're transferring, and indeed my Minister was very clear on that point. Moving quickly, the next one, we've also talked about the carry bag levy, that's another PFG target. There's the waste recycling target, which is 45% recycling this year.
46 next year.
45 this year, 46 next year. I think the latest position we were at was around 43.
And around,
but there will be new figures published shortly. Going too far, we should show an improving trend on that. There's the emissions targets, the carbon emissions target, which again is the difficulty there. We have the problem with that target. It's a target for 2020. Is it 2020?
2020. Yes.
2025, isn't it? I thought it was later than 2020. Anyway, sorry, I have no. But anyhow, I mean, it depends on how you run the numbers. But at the moment, we would regard ourselves as being a bit behind where we should be on that target. But what we're doing there is we've adopted a slightly different strategy, or a very different strategy of actually proactively working with business, including the agriculture sector, because very briefly in Northern Ireland, as you know, greenhouse gas emissions come from a very limited number of sources. There's agriculture, there's energy generation, or coal and oil fired stations, and there's transport. Is that right? If you take those three out, that's most of our carbon emissions. So by definition, have to work with agriculture. The carbon emissions from energy to some extent will depend ultimately strategically on how we go in methods of energy generation. And then the other one is, key one is transport. And again, that's working on seeking to promote lower energy lower carbon emitting types of forms of transport, encouraging more public transport, lesser use of cars, etc. So that's what's going on in that one. What ones have I not mentioned?
Biodiversity.
Pardon?
Biodiversity.
Yeah, and that one's. Can you
The assays.
say what's happening on that one?
No, the point is, as long as whether or not the reason
Oh,
I
yeah,
asked the
I know the
question
question
is reasonably impacting on the budget, but
yeah. Well,
because-
my answer is at the moment, I don't see this budget even impacting.
no, as long as
dramatically on our
but the
capacity.
key thing for us, we agreed targets. As long as we're trying to achieve them under the PFG, that's
Yeah.
going on. I mean, that's
Yeah.
because and the reason why I'm leading into this, because obviously now at some point we're going to have to reprioritise to deliver it, right? And the reason why I asked about especially the local government, but more importantly, another question I have, there is some concerns now. A couple of years ago, we went through this workforce model in planning.
Yeah.
We're transferring this over come the 1st of April, and do we still believe we have enough staff to deliver that programme when it goes to the local authority?
Yeah.
That's the
Both measured objectively against the workforce planning model is one reason I'm shaking my head. The other reason is actually we're transferring more staff than we would need to run the planning system, particularly at a more senior level, because for the obvious reasons we've 6 area planning districts. At the moment we're moving to 11, so therefore we've had to virtually double the number of area planning officers. So there'll be 1 area planning officer for each of the new councils. So we have done that. I've put the people in place, allocated the budget to pay for them, and that budget then will transfer across to local government in April.
You know, see in terms of, because Pam asked the question about 500 people, 500 jobs. I mean, I have to ask the question, no, you have to cut jobs, but I mean, a simple question would be, you know, if you have cut such jobs, I mean, that's be a question then for the jobs in the first place. I mean, if you're able to remove...
Yeah, well...
no, let's be realistic here. I mean,
yeah.
If we're able to, because I would have serious concerns how then, and the question leading on to the jobs, I would take it that we need to protect the frontline delivery, and it's hard to define exactly in your department what the frontline delivery is.
Yeah.
But in terms of that impact,
yeah.
How do you feel that would, in terms of the removal of job or whatever packages? I'm sure the over 60s would have a job on the equality grounds if it letting them go, but not get into equality issues today. But in terms of how those 500 jobs would impact on what you would perceive to be frontline return or frontline protection.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, to some extent, right, everyone's front line is probably what they do at the moment. But as I mentioned at the beginning, and this is still a work in progress, but if you evolve a strategy of saying what are the things, there are things we have to do. You know, there are things just we're obliged by statute to do, like losing most of planning, but we still have some planning responsibilities, so we will have to process planning applications. That's not negotiable. Now we'll have to do that as efficiently and with as few staff as possible. We cannot not do it. There are other things we have to do. We have to process licence applications, discharge applications, all that stuff. So those things will have to continue to be done. There are other activities which we should regard as a priority, and I mentioned environmental protection activities as a priority. So, in a sense, if you start at that end of the telescope, then say, well, what else? What's the other things you do? And I mean, the other things we do is a lot of, from discretion, is what it, isn't it? But activity around environmental protection, around activity that supports various environmental schemes in the department. A lot of areas which have to curtail our activities in those areas.
No, fair enough, and thanks for the explanation.
But I can get more detail.
It's just we bit difficult to quantify, but the way you've explained it, that's 100%. Because I mean, we have a duty then to protect whatever's the statute. That's grand. I mean, it's just the others how it's going to overall impact. And I mean, I know the chair keeps mentioning this EU infraction. I mean, we could talk all day about the EU infraction. The reality is, whether we like it or not, and I mean, I heard the discussion this morning on the radio. We are heavily reliant on public sector jobs. And, I make no apologies in terms of my own area for that. And until we have a capacity to grow the infrastructure and get private sector jobs. That's grand. We're going to have to look at it, protecting those jobs. Realistic. But it's just when the stark reality, when you start talking about those number of jobs that's going to go between this new scheme, what gaps in this country to deliver and meet our targets within the department.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing. And just finally, Chair,
Can I come in?
Yeah, go on.
Can I come in on a point there, Chair? Thanks. So what I'm asking is, there, 500 jobs equals the activities that aren't now going to happen. No.
Not well. We don't. It's
No,
not
because I just don't know how you come to the figure of 500 jobs.
Well, the 500 jobs figure is based, as I mentioned earlier, on what we estimate we need to some extent.
Yeah, to find the savings.
Is pardon?
That you're estimating 500 jobs that you need to get rid of, in order to reach the figure.
It's also to allow us, frankly, to not to have to permanently stop doing certain things. In other words, we'll have to stop or curtail it or suspend it in the short term. But things like road safety promotion and other programmes that we support at the moment in local government, which we think are valuable, to allow us hopefully to get back to supporting some of those programmes again. And it's making the choice between, what's the best way to spend the money available at the moment? Because people are in the jobs at the moment, the money has to, in a sense, go and spend on salaries. But if you can cut back on the number of people you're employing and look at better ways of doing department, be more efficient, then by definition, once those people are freed up, it means then more money becomes available to allocate back out to other ways of spending the money through other outside organisations, community groups, etc. So that's part of the strategy as well.
Okay.
But it's because the people are going to be there on the 1st of April, you have this dramatic effect that you have to continue to pay them until, in a sense, they've decided to leave.
No, that's sad. It's a difficult one. So, but we'll get as the process goes on. Things. Just want to.
Well, there's a good question. Can I just jump in there, Leo? I mean, is it what you're saying? You can work with 1,000 staff, so you could actually let go of 500 and still maintain services.
Well, can maintain a level of service. It won't be obviously what we do at the moment. By definition.
Yeah, but you were saying this is mostly on monetary terms, or it's all driven by money. That you must
it's primarily
shed
driven,
500
staff primarily
staff
driven by money.
in order to save 16 million.
Yeah, but we will have to wait and see what plays out. Ultimately.
How did you arrive at that 500? That
because
number.
if you reverse engineer back to the 16 million figure, and the opening reduction, as you know, was 13 million. Now we're aware already. Okay. I mean, I could mention other. We know of other certain pressures in the system that isn't yet factored into this figure. And if you run through the arithmetic, if you want to at least begin to restore some of the things we do, in particular the things we do externally, for the future, then we estimate that's the sort of numbers of staff we need to release in order to generate the savings to allow us to reinstate funding activities in other areas, including the areas mentioned at the very end of the paragraph 23 in the future. There is no money at the moment.
Yes. Okay. And on top of your own departmental staff, what about the community and voluntary sector, the organisations you fund? How many job losses do you think there may be there?
I don't have a specific, precise figure, but inevitably our grant payments support jobs in local community groups, etc.
Yeah.
And probably also in larger group bodies like the universities, etc.
Yes, I mean, would match funding, would
obviously
GSF funding and all that?
No, we would seek to ensure that if specific funding stream is drawing down EU money, obviously there's an added incentive to protect that particular piece of match funding.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you need that money to be able to get more money into Northern Ireland.
That's the point,
So I mean, that's going to be drastically cut.
Yeah, but as I say, we will try our best. Do you want to say? just how much money is involved in match funding at the moment?
It's in around 300,000 to 400,000, I think, in the current year of our match funding. But there's nothing built into this budget for 15-16 for match funding.
So no match funding at all?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
something we would want to obviously look at very carefully, because you don't want to forgo wider EU receipts, because that would be a bit illogical.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, you
No, that's grand, Chair. Yeah, I had a final point, Chair, before.
Okay.
But no, and I appreciate it. And I mean, clearly what we're looking at now is going to have serious consequences over the next 2 or 3 years, or next number of years.
Yeah.
Be realistic with that. Just a couple of quick points. Obviously, the road safety issue is a major issue for us as a committee, and would certainly like to see how we can retain or certainly support whatever new ideas that may be. The other thing too is, and I know that there's a list there after paragraph 23 and a number of things like that there is supports that are big benefits, especially in council areas that grow tourism and everything else. There's a number of benefits. We certainly would support them. But what I would like you, Leo, to take out of this, and because I've been saying this for a number of years now, I know some members agree with it and some members don't, but I'm going to say it anyway. Last week or the week before, we received a presentation, I think, on some water quality from members of the department. They've set a certain target. Well, clearly we should be setting targets that's achievable and realistic. But the main point I want to make is this here. If there's a European directive, or if there's a directive coming out of Europe, that we have to do our part, being part of the member state. But there needs to be a fund in light of the constraints you have in your budgets. We need to be looking at new innovative ways of drawing down that funding to address those issues. I don't think people should be expected to, if there's a directive ground, adhere to it, comply, but certainly there needs to be support for you to achieve that. And I think maybe it's a new way of thinking, maybe, and it's only a thought on that matter.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that you're absolutely right. This sort of situation does, I'm afraid, force you to have to start new ways of thinking about things. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sandra?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. A few of my issues and concerns might have been touched on, but I still have a few more. I mean, we talked about the staff salaries and or the staffing levels and the cuts that you're going to make there. If the driver's finance rather than people, obviously it's finance, then it would not be wiser to take a more strategic review on those people that you need the most and to identify them first, rather than just open it for for everyone to avail of a redundancy program. I know it's a difficult it's a difficult
I mean, what I'm saying does look a bit sort of crude, might be the word you use, but it's just with the scale of what we're facing, it's difficult to then run an exercise to say, well, there are particular people. There are lots of people doing very important things, and lots of people doing very important things that we'll have to continue to do even after all this is over.
Yeah.
But the way the schemes work is that basically, when you're running a redundancy scheme, you can go at it one of two ways. When you're selecting people, you can seek to introduce criteria, and those can be, as I mentioned, for example, nobody in IT can go, for example. That could be a very realistic outcome. Or you can seek to define other skills bases or other reasons or reasons why people can't go. Difficult with that approach, paradoxically, is that sometimes you end up getting into lots of difficulties with members of staff themselves because they want to go, but you've put them in a category that you think shouldn't go, and then they get very unhappy. So in a sense, the system over recent years has instead simply said that the criteria will be finance and cost. So what allows you to go will be how cheap you are to let go, to be blunt about it. So if you want to go and you're relatively cheap, if I could use that term, sorry, to let go, then you'll be let go ahead of somebody who would be more expensive.
Tell me why
release.
someone would be cheap to let go.
Pardon?
Tell me why someone would be cheap to let go.
Well,
Just
for
to clarify
example,
that.
if you're people who are near retirement age, for example, because well, I should be careful because it depends on the scheme. I suppose.
I don't know the ins and outs of the
People,
scheme.
somebody without the full qualifying service, without the full 35 years, might volunteer to go because they would get less compensation because they wouldn't have been in as long. That's if the scheme goes the way the
But
draft.
then that person might not be cheap to let go, considering how efficient you want to be and how good that person might be in their job. And,
Yeah.
so it's not going to be cheap in the long run. So that's why I'm saying a
question,
strategic approach.
crudely and from memory, is that generally speaking, at least in the past, the people who are cheapest to let go are people who are at or near retirement age.
This was important.
People who've joined recently. People who've joined recently haven't accrued much entitlement to anything, so to put it crudely, and the people who are expensive to let go are the people in the middle. People who are in mid-career, very expensive to let go.
Yeah, just, it's just sometimes those, those people might be the ones that do the job the best, or might be able to cover for someone else who's not doing their job. And that's why I'm saying, is it not? I know it's a challenge, but there does need to be strategic thinking in that area too. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
But
And there'll be
you need to have very clear criteria too. If you have, say 700 staff all wanting that in the voluntary scheme, so how are you going to justify yourself saying, only 500 of these, of these employees can go, but not the other 200?
That's why the cost criteria is used, because it's A, completely objective, and B, it's easy to understand. Now it has the dysfunctional outputs that the previous member referred to, but it does. I don't know. Because we mean, a couple of years ago, we were running the planning service. That's the way we did it.
Okay.
It meant you were literally able to draw a line on the page and say we can allow X down to that person, and nobody below that can go, or above that, sorry, because they're too expensive. Your statement.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, doesn't it, Sandra? Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the next point. Well, road safety is obviously a big issue and has been mentioned by previous members here, obviously. It'll be disappointing to find out that, the funding isn't going to young farmers clubs and other youth organisations. Does that mean that there's no money going at all in that direction?
Well, that's not the position yet. I've highlighted it. We've referred to it because we anticipate it, and indeed within the department, and indeed for the Minister, there's obviously a significant concern around road safety generally and road safety issues. So, we're not saying, quotes, there's no money at all going to that. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying that, out of the available resources we've identified so far, out of anything else we can identify in the short term, that could be, very well might be, a priority in terms of allocating money to residual activities that aren't currently earmarked for funding. And as I said, we would be relying on views of this committee, obviously, and other responses we receive.
I mean, if the road traffic amendment bill comes through, I mean, surely there's going to need to be funding allocated to get the information out to our younger people about those changes. And
yes,
there's that ongoing.
Yeah.
There is really a need for that. So it was right. Well, thank you for that. The other aspect was the local government grants. Colin mentioned the rate support grant reduction there, and the derating grants being reduced there by 15.1%. That's almost 4 million. Do the local councils, are they aware of this being cut? Sorry, local government grants, paragraph 8.
Yeah.
Are the local councils, are they aware that that's?
They're aware at a high level because my minister wrote to the councils on the 30th of October to alert them to this issue.
How will this impact on the councils?
Well, what it would do is, in simple terms, as you probably most of you know better than me, councils at this time of the year will begin looking at their budgets for next year, and of course that's significantly complicated this year because of the new structures. And between now and February, they'll look at the rate penny product, all that sort of thing. They'll also look at and forecast rates, or forecast income from grants, and then that will feed through to their final decision on their rates. So the impact is that councils will need to make assumptions. There will be assumptions at the moment as to how much money they will have available next year, including shortfalls against previous income they would have associated with various grant schemes from us. There'll be other income, but it'll be a significant issue for them in that sense.
Okay, thank you. And the final point.
And people will see their rates go up?
Potentially, it depends. Depends how you make the savings. You could cut your costs as well as putting rates up.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's a yes. In relation to the grants programmes, and you've detailed a wide range of those that will get no funding. Do you think that reduction of funding that have an impact on the department's ability to meet its targets in the various areas?
Well, I mean, as we've just discussed, probably not around the key PFG targets. It will certainly mean we'll have to reconfigure our more general business plan targets for next year, which is a process we're just starting at this time of the year. So it will mean that we will have to formulate different targets than the ones we have at the moment. I don't know. Do you want to? How else it would affect?
No, well, it shouldn't have a significant impact on the programme for government targets, because the 2 million earmarked there for local government grants includes a number of grants which work towards the programme for government targets, specifically the waste.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth pointing out to members that this is just a one-year budget, which in itself is very difficult for target setting, because a lot of the targets have consequences into the future years, and we're not. I think we're not expecting it to get better in the subsequent years, although we have no detail of what the budget is going to be. So we also have to try and anticipate or think of what the subsequent 2 to 3 years budget is going to look like.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Chair. Robin.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. O'Reilly, for your presentation this morning. I don't. This is probably a political question that you can't answer, but anyway, I just put the point to you that strategy here, the overall strategy here, is to reduce the number of people employed in the Northern Ireland Civil Service by 3,000. I think that's the projected figure, and the department is expected to effectively play its role in that overall reduction. The strategy is to reduce the public sector payroll effectively. In a situation where the economy is not particularly buoyant and is not providing the additional private sector jobs, is this the most appropriate moment to embark on such a strategy, even if that strategy was desirable?
Yeah, it's a wider question, as I say. Gosh.
Take the Fifth Amendment.
I suppose in one way, but in one way, it's probably there's never, the perfect way to do this would be to have some 5-year very gradual rundown of public expenditure at the very same time as you have a 5-year gradual increase in private sector jobs, and the two things match each other out. Usually, as you know, life doesn't work like that. So unfortunately, we're sort of into this cliff. Public expenditure. But
there was a very interesting way you put it, perhaps, if I could use a Maoist term. It's the Great Leap Forward, which was a total, which as the chairman would know, was a total and absolute disaster for the Chinese people and Chinese economy as well. I'm not asking you to comment on that. But in terms of local government, taking that as a discrete area in which the budget impacts, you've already answered questions from this is over in relation to that, but if you take the overall effect of that, you've got the E-rating grant, which effectively has to be paid by local government, whether they get the money or not. They have to forgo the rates, and they have to. They can't rate people. That would be wrong. And then there's the support grant in terms of trying to, as it were, equalise the difference between better off councils and less well off councils. So it's a double whammy really for the councils, because they will not have the extra money coming from the support grant, isn't that right?
Yeah. Those councils who receive the support grant.
The poorer councils, if I can characterise them as that, they will either have to cut their services or alternatively put their rates up. So the impact. So there's going to be an impact on local government, probably in the weakest areas of local government, in terms of either demanding more money from people, local people, ratepayers, or alternatively saying to people, by the way, we're going to reduce your services. Is that the net effect of that?
Yeah, it's not an unreasonable outline of what would happen if this scenario played through into the final outcome.
Yes.
I mean, these are still obviously draft proposals.
So not a very daring prospect for those new councils, is it?
Very progressive.
In terms of this new role that they've got to play for local people.
Yeah, it'll mean obviously, when you're talking about cut, you always have to look to it, what is the overall percentage effect on their capacity to run their services, and that will vary as well between different councils.
And it mightn't endear them to their local electorates either.
No.
Given the fact that they will be forced to reduce services or increase rates. That's probably by way of comment rather than a question.
Panic.
Discuss. I'm glad Mr. Weir sees the humour of it. I'm sure.
Making your point.
Yes,
making your point, isn't it?
Mr. Weir's council might, local councils mightn't be affected as much as others, perhaps in the west of northwest. However, just one last point. I don't want to labour this. In relation to the redundancy package, as it were, first of all, I think it's 100 million's been set aside by the Department of Finance these redundancies. That's really, and if you were over 60 in the civil service, has your pension been protected? In other words, the rather adverse pension changes that came into being as a result of pension reform.
That's, there's a long, gosh, I'm not sure precisely the detail, but there's certainly a lead-in, a lead-in time to the application of the new scheme.
But if you were over 60, you would probably be all right. Your pension.
Well, in that regard.
Yeah, in that regard, as far as your pensions are concerned.
Yeah. Although that is an issue, as you know, is not related to do with this budget. It's.
Oh no, I know, I understand that, but you have to get people to say, well, look, this would be quite a good opportunity for me to leave the civil service and retire happily ever after, right? What I'm saying is, are there, perhaps I'll get to the point, cut to the chase, do you think that conditions at this moment in time are conducive to people saying, this is an appropriate moment for me to retire, I'm going to get a little bit of extra money here and so forth? I mean, is the package so attractive to people perhaps not over 60, but say between 50 and 59, to encourage them to retire.
Well, as I said earlier, there's different views around at the moment on that, and in a sense, it won't really be known until you actually ask. Just ask the electorate, ask people, you know, do they find this attractive or not?
Yeah. What's your impression at the moment?
Personal opinion is that it may not just be as attractive as people, including the staff themselves, think it would be.
Yes.
Because I think they're working off historic models.
If by analogy I went to teaching at the moment, because of all sorts of changes, teachers over 50 at least are unhappy about leaving the teaching profession, because clearly it would be pretty disastrous for them to leave now. So they have to stay on, which effectively means you can't bring young people in and so forth. I'm not going to go into all that. But is it an analogous situation where, in fact, it's less attractive now for people to take early retirement?
It is factually less attractive, definitely, than it was.
So how are you going to
2
persuade?
years ago.
Well, the corollary of that is, how are you going to persuade people to take voluntary redundancy?
Well, I suppose, by presenting them with the scheme, whatever the final detail of the scheme.
But if the scheme isn't that attractive, how are you going to persuade them?
Then you won't.
Yeah, which leads me on to the other
question.
If you can't persuade people to retire voluntarily, would it not mean that you'll have to make compulsory redundancies?
Well, at one level you'd say that's the logical sequence, but as you know, ministers have indicated they don't wish to using a compulsory scheme.
Sorry to interrupt here, Chair, but I think it is a little bit important, just in terms of the terminology, because I think there is significance within this. What is being talked about is a voluntary exit scheme, not a voluntary retirement scheme, or there is a degree of difference between the two.
There are.
Well, just explain the difference then.
Gosh, I'm not sure.
The difference in those two fundamentally is about the word retirement, because early voluntary retire, and a 25-year-old wouldn't necessarily voluntarily retire. They would go exit and look for
well, the point is this: anybody can take the exit scheme. You want to call it exit scheme.
Yeah.
And is this similar to voluntary redundancy scheme? Are you talking of the same thing?
The terminology currently being used is a voluntary exit scheme.
Okay.
There's different terminologies. The different terminologies are there because the schemes are different.
Yes.
We used to, when we were doing the planning releases, it was a voluntary early release scheme, it was called.
Yes.
Now it's a voluntary exit scheme, that's because it's different.
But the point I make is this: you are only going to leave, if not retire, right? You're only going to leave if the contentious term retirement is taken out of it.
Yeah.
You're only going to leave if you think it's attractive. I'm going to get my dough, I'm going to live happily ever after.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to go into, if you're a younger person, say between 50 and if I'm going to go into another job in the private sector or the public sector, another part of the public sector. But if the squeeze is on the public sector, very unlikely you're going to get another job in the public sector. So you really have to have a fairly buoyant private sector to attract people to exit. Not right?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to mention, it's interesting there because you can compare the experiences we haven't yet had here, but the experience they have had in England, particularly, but England in particular in terms of early exits from the civil service. But again, they did work, but the difference, of course, there in the southeast of England, you have a very buoyant labour market.
Of course,
and readily leave.
This is posited on, or it should be posited on, a buoyant economy, able to provide alternative employment for people who are young enough still to work. And I just don't see that in the local economy at the moment.
No. You could find 3,000 people out of jobs and nowhere to go.
Yep.
And David Cameron talked about a third recession. That may happen in Northern Ireland. So just one last question maybe no one has touched on. the executive is proposing a change fund. Now, not a lot of money, 13 million. Are you going to bid for it?
We would certainly consider that seriously. To be honest with you, I haven't seen the detail.
Yeah, we haven't seen the detail
of what this
from
fund's
DFP.
about, but it's always important because you often sometimes initiatives that can save a lot of money cost a little bit of money up front.
Invest
Certainly,
to save
yeah,
type of thinking.
It is important. Those sorts of funds are available.
Yeah, but
I think
invest to save really takes a long time to see the return.
Yeah, well,
This fund, I think, rightly, although we haven't seen the detail, it's also linked to digitisation and
Okay.
the department, depending on the terms of the fund, would have a number of schemes that it would like to apply.
Okay.
Or so we're sort of ready and waiting for the
Sure.
detail.
Okay.
I mean, just a final point I'd make in relation to the civil service point is, you're all aware of this, but it's always important to remember that the distribution of civil servants across departments does not match the distribution of global budgets across departments, because obviously the two big spending departments are education and health, and yet they've only a few hundred civil servants, because obviously most of their money goes out into the sector. So it's departments like ourselves and agriculture and social development have relatively large numbers of civil servants. It's just the way the public sector is structured.
When you realise that as
Yeah.
the voluntary exit scheme has been looked at, it is potentially a scheme for public servants, as well as
Yes,
civil
yeah,
servants.
yeah.
So we shouldn't just
Yeah.
get too sort of tightly defined on the basis of here's this one particular batch of people, because the bulk of people in the public sector are actually in public service rather than civil service.
The 2,000 teachers that are going to get the chop, they will be able to benefit from this as well. Is that right?
Probably a little bit.
Potentially, I think obviously there's a number of
I think it's different scheme for
components, as Mr. Weir has said.
Yeah.
Okay.
2,000 teachers and 3,000 civil service, 5,000 people into 100 million, 20,000 each. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are they talking of 3,000 in
What?
total, roughly 3,000, I
Hit
think,
some areas harder
in
than
total?
others.
So everyone will get 33.
Armagh district.
I think to be fair, Chair, we're maybe simply so widely speculating in
Yeah.
terms of things, probably not.
Yeah,
likely.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Leo. Certainly you will, I'm sure, have our support in asking for more money and just saying this is very unreasonable. This
Can I
is
just
me speaking.
emphasise, again, given the late arrival of this stuff, if either A, we want to talk to us if we can, but B, if more detailed questions that occur to members,
Sure.
without you
We'll
let
come
us
back
have
to
them,
you.
and we'll
Yeah, sure.
provide the
Okay,
information as quickly as possible.
sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Okay, members, as you know, the Committee for Finance and Personnel has asked all the committees to submit a report in what we think about the report. So, members, any particular points? Sheila's going to prepare a draft to bring back to us next week for us to look at, but any particular emphasis you want to place on this report we're going to send to the FP committee?
Well, the main worry would be, is the department able to carry out its functions at an adequate level?
Yeah.
Clearly the functions will be adversely impacted.
Yes.
Yeah, Chair, I would support that, because that's other members are entitled to speak for their own area, but in this matter, I know that Newry and Armagh certainly heavily reliant on public sector jobs now. If they're proposing to cut that number of jobs out of the department,
Yeah. 1/3, literally.
it's different if you have a
1/3
strong
of all
private sector and we're going to grow the private sector. That's grand.
Yeah.
But in the absence of that, we're reliant on the public sector jobs. There's no doubt about it.
And the fact that DOE already has such a small budget,
Yeah.
and to cut that percentage, 11.1%, are just going to decimate the ability of that department to carry out its public services.
So, I mean,
Sorry.
It's more than jobs, and of course it's job, but it's also really worries me is that we're talking about cutting a grant that helps the poorest councils
Yes.
functions. That's completely counter to any progressive notion of how we do budgets. It
And
would be a
that's
disaster.
going back on our word too, because we promised that there would be 3 years adjustment of giving them grants so that they can level it out, and over 3 years to adjust the rate. And now we're saying no, we're not going to give you that.
There's no scope in a lot of places, and especially the place I come from, for raising rates. So what you're really talking about is cutting services to people who need services most.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
should be aware of that.
Peter?
Chair, no, just a couple of points just in relation to that. I think there are concerns that all of us have in that broader level. I mean, I would say purely as regards in terms of the rate cut. I mean, let's also put this in a little bit of perspective. The amount raised in rates, both local and national, is about over £1.1 billion. You're talking about 6 million in relation to that. So you're talking about, to the average ratepayer, less than half of 1% in that regard. That's not to say this is, but I mean,
we're not talking about the average rate. We're not talking about average places. We're talking about places that are crippled with unemployment. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about
some of the people of that nature will not necessarily be paying rates in that regard. What we're saying is,
but the services are going to end up being cut, and the businesses that are struggling are going to end up having.
And the problem with the best will in the world is there's none of these things that I think any of us like in that regard. But we're against an envelope where the situation is that the executive, to be fair to them as a whole, are having to deal with the situation that the money that they are getting across, whatever internal arguments are within things, the money that they're getting across from Westminster is year on year in real terms going down. And the problem on it is, and we've seen it in other sectors as well, that means that certain things will have to get cut. And the problem is, we're not generally speaking going to be in a position that it's, here's, if you like, bad expenditures getting cut, because I think we're at a level where whatever is getting cut in whatever area is going to create problems and pain. And we've seen it where we've seen complaints from the arts sector, we've seen it in complaints, understandably, from the third level education in relation to it.
1,100.
And I've seen, in my own locality in that regard, even with health getting more money, where there's a situation of cutbacks locally, which I think are going to be very damaging. So the problem essentially is, okay, I think we can raise, to some extent, concerns over particular things, but we've also got to realise that means, for instance, if certain things aren't done within DOE or elsewhere, it means that there's going to be bigger cuts elsewhere. So, I think there's got to be a little bit of maturity around this as well, to be perfectly honest on it. But I think from a committee point of view, I think we've no other option but to is where there are concerns in that regard on it. But let's do it against a realistic backdrop.
Well, the protection for the two big departments means that then the smaller departments are going to see a disproportionate percentage of cuts. That is it viable? For them to maintain services.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard. Let's leave aside the education stuff for the moment. But it's hard when you have a situation that, because of the pressures, and to be fair, pressures not just happening anywhere else, pressures across the world, particularly in terms of health, where it's very difficult to say, well, actually, we're going to prioritise, and this is where it does become difficult in that regard. We're going to prioritise these other range of government services over people who are ill, who are on that side of things. So I'm just saying, I think the problem is, to be fair to the broad level of the executive, there are no easy solutions in this, because the problem is our window of money is reducing, and the problem, which is one of the areas that to some extent we're complaining of, the only additional way then that largely a lot of stuff can be levered in is things like water rates or massive increases in rates, and then you're actually in the same sort of worse effect. You're only simply exacerbating the situation that we're complaining of in the first place.
Prescription charges.
Yeah, but and I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to that. But there's a wider debate.
There's a number of measures, but the important thing about today and the discussion was, when they talk about that level of jobs, how that relates in return for services and how it's going to impact on the department delivering, and that's our responsibility. I mean, I would be very, very concerned how that's going to happen.
Yes. Well, Chair, I mean, I used the term jocosely, the great leap forward, but I think it's not a bad, it's a colourful phrase, but it's not a bad way of characterising.
Several million people starved to death after that.
Well, I'm not expecting that to happen here, but it's not a bad way. It's a colourful way of expressing what is a badly worked out approach to
not
dealing
well
with our
thought out.
public services and I think the economy at large. But there are specific points that were raised here, in particular in relation to road safety, which is a terribly important issue for families. And then also the physical environment, the protection of the physical environment. We have a duty, not just under European law and European policies, but also we have a duty simply to protect our environment, which is being damaged all the time. And that really is going to be adversely impacted.
Yeah. Enforcement officers, we've talked on many occasions of the lack of enforcement, and if we're going to see more cuts, then it's just going to be down to nothing on the ground.
Can I just say, I'm reluctant to get into the big budget debate because we could do that all day, but and we'll all put on our submissions or whatever. But just to say, it needs to be remembered, when jobs go, posts go. So people may be prepared to, retire and move on and get out of the way or whatever, but there's the people coming behind them then don't have a job, and so that is a job lost to the economy and lost to the community. So just be remember when we're talking about, there might be so many people who are very happy to take a package and go, but then those jobs are gone for the people coming behind them. Sometimes I think that's lost when we talk about redundancies. But anyway, thanks.
So it's the loss of posts, not jobs.
But is then it's the impact on who's there who has to deliver that same service, because somebody else has to double up on it. Let's be realistic, and that's what I'm trying to relate it to, the service provided, which is the main issue. And that's the key issue. That's the service provided. So the service is definitely, besides the post, and I agree the post been lost, but the delivery and the provision of service lost.
Well, members, I'm aware of the time. So Sheila, if you can draft something, send around.
With the wisdom of Solomon.
I don't like any of it.
Exactly. We just say no, never. Okay, members.
No, we can't say that because then you end up giving in eventually.
I haven't by noon on Friday, so it'll be all right.
Right, members, we need to move on. We have 2 more items. Okay, members, then we're back onto our main programme, and we have, I think, Glyn Roberts in here. Glyn Roberts is going to give us a briefing on the planning and local government. Glyn is, of course, from the Northern Ireland Independent Retail Trade Association. And if I can also welcome, is it Des Stephens, Planning Advisor, and Andy?
Yes.
Andy Stephens, same surname?
Yes.
Not related?
We are, yes. Father and son.
You are? Okay.
Family business.
Okay.
Came to the hair profile.
Also, Planning Advisor. We are very pushed for time. We spend a lot of time, quite rightly so, on debating on the budget.
Yes.
Half an hour, is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to brief your members on our programme for local government. I think.
Sorry, members, just Glyn has a. Is that from you? Is that right? That's briefing paper at 293.
Yeah, this should be our submission to the single planning policy statement and our programme for local government, Local First. And as members are aware, we are the representative business organisation for the independent retail sector. Our members include retailers, wholesalers, suppliers to the sector, affiliated chambers of commerce and traders groups, and our 1,500 members come from every village, town and city across Northern Ireland. And as you're aware, that we are committed to standing up for our high streets and our town centres and ensure that our independent retail sector gets a fair deal from government. And our members very much see themselves as community entrepreneurs who provide an important service to the local community and believe in genuine partnerships with their local council. And we also believe that the town centres have to be vibrant and diverse, and also be centres of not just retail but also hospitality excellence as well. And perhaps if I can touch upon the question of local government reform, we were the first and so far only business organisation to have produced, if you like, a detailed programme for the new 11 super councils. We recognise that with such a fundamental change, and indeed very much the debate was around process, we want to try and change the debate away from process to policy and really put the question to the new 11 super councils what are you going to do with these new powers when you get them on 1st of April? So we do, whilst there are many challenges to get the councils good to go by 1st of April, there are also many opportunities as well. And it is obviously disappointing that, despite his best efforts, that Minister Storey wasn't able to get the regeneration powers over the line by 1st of April. And obviously, they will be coming on 1st of April 2016. But on the broader question of local government reform, we believe that the new system, with the 11 councils, with their enhanced powers, provides a real opportunity to make a difference for local communities. And we want very much to move the debate from process to policy. And very much the retail sector has an important role to play, not just in terms of town centres, but to reprofile and rebalance the economy. Our retail sector, being the largest sector of our private sector, has a key role to play. But to survive in modern retail, it is about a constant process of change, innovation, embracing new technology and reaching out to an increasingly sophisticated consumer. And very much now we see the town centres being unique, continue unique and characterful shops, cafes, restaurants, essential services, brand name retailers, cultural events are all essential parts of the modern high street and the modern town centre, and very much as well embracing the digital high street agenda as well. On planning, we very much welcome the broad thrust of the single planning policy statement, but I think it does need more work, and my colleagues from Matrix will go into greater detail about our views about the single planning policy statement. So we do believe that there are a bit more work that needs to do to ensure that our economy, environment and future growth of town centres is an integral part of it. And obviously, when the consultation moves on to legislation coming before the Assembly, we will be very interested in any amendments on that debate. So perhaps at some point when the bill is in front of your committee, Madam Chair, we can come back to you on that. We want to see a planning service which makes timely and responsible decisions, focusing on sustainable economic applications. I think that word sustainable is at the heart of what we want to see. We have no problem with sustainable economic applications given priority within the planning system and obviously by our new super councils. But we don't believe that certainly out-of-town shopping centres are in any way sustainable economic applications. They displace and destroy more jobs than they create, and they have contributed to Northern Ireland having the highest shop vacancy rate in the UK, and the recent figures from our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium shows that Northern Ireland still has, by a long way, the highest shop vacancy rate in the UK. The SBS focuses on economic consideration and states that large-scale investment proposals with job creation potential will be given particular priority. And as we've said, that we believe that out-of-town retail is not sustainable economic development. And in fairness to that sustainable development, there is need to balance economic, social and environmental objectives in a clear and objective manner in the management of development and decision-making and decision-taking, otherwise economic factors will be determining. We agree with the town centre first and sequential test approach and support the enhancement and diversity in the range of town centre uses. All leisure, cultural, community, housing and business facilities should be directed toward the town centre in order to promote town centre first as the first choice of business. And it was, I have to say, for the record, very disappointing that the Environment Minister, who championed the whole town centre first thrust of the new single planning policy, then went on to make decisions in Strabane and Newry which were completely contrary to his own department's draft planning policy statement. And obviously, despite the opposition of the local chambers of commerce and our own organisation in those areas, the Minister decided to press ahead with two large-scale out-of-town developments in Strabane and Newry, despite those towns having town centre locations which could have housed a decent-sized supermarket. And in terms of the role of councils, we want very much, in terms of their area plan process, to ensure that they have a strong and vigorous town centre first approach to all planning policy in relation to major retail applications. We would want to see councils adopt this approach when also considering major planning applications such as cinemas, hotels and leisure parks as well, because any business that locates in a town or city centre, there's automatically a multiplier effect there in terms of footfall and support for their business. And obviously members here were considering the closure of the 10 Ulster Bank. That, and funny stuff, is a reverse example of the argument, because those 10 branches that close result in less footfall for the traders in those areas as well. So very much we want to see town centre first approach in all major applications. We want to see councils drawing up effective standing orders to ensure there's adequate consultation with local traders on significant planning applications which impact on town centres. We very much support a strong planning guidance element within the new statutory code of conduct for councillors. And we also believe that major Article 31 planning applications should remain with the DOE Minister. We also want to see the councils adopt a comprehensive shop vacancy strategy to ensure that they have targets set and 6-month progress reports on how they address dereliction within their respective town centres, and that alongside a tailored retail development plan for each of the town centres that they are responsible for. We have been very proactive, not just in the policy terms, but we have presented now to 3 and soon to be 4 of the super councils. I've met with most of the chief executives. So we have been hands-on working with the shadow councils, because we do believe that there is an important role there in terms of the private sector working alongside the super councils so they can realise their potential. So we're very committed to that, but we are making progress on planning, but it is far too slow for our liking. And maybe if I can hand on to my colleague Des.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to do this presentation to you this morning. I just want to outline the overview. The strategic, rather than singled in, strategic planning policy statement for Northern Ireland will replace, the SPPS will replace all the existing policy. And I think this paves the way for the transfer of powers to the 11 new super councils from 1st of April, as you all know, from the present unitary system to the 2-tier system, when councils will become responsible for local development plans, planning applications and planning enforcement, and the department will be responsible for regional planning policy, regionally significant applications and planning legislation. Now already, and we haven't even got to that point, our concerns have been raised, and we share this with you. The department is no longer applying Article 31 to major applications. And I think you should be aware of this, because it raises concerns as what will happen post 1st of April next year. There are supposed to be 3 levels of application: the regionally significant, the significant ones, or large scale, and the smaller routine applications. And the regionally significant ones are supposed to be considered by the DOE, the core of the department, in the future, and the other 2 categories by these local super councils. But already the Department of the Environment is no longer, and we have already several examples, one in Ballymena, one in Larne, where they have not applied Article 31. And we have a ludicrous situation where one of these applications came in 8 years ago and was in Article 31 and is not being applied in the repeat application that has now come in. So the department itself is already paving the way for certain areas of concern, particularly with regard to major retail applications. I just leave that point with you for the moment. The important second factor that we wish to put before you is consistency between councils, where we're moving from a situation where we have 1 department to 11 super councils. And if there is any variation of interpretation of policy, then there is concerns that will arise over how that translates on the ground. And we do already in the draft SPPS. Remember, it went out for consultation in February. We haven't seen the final document yet, but there's already concerns over the vagueness and therefore interpretation of some of the subject matter may lead to different interpretations by different councils. Economic priorities is another major area of concern that Glyn has touched on, where economic considerations will be an important matter, carefully balanced against the natural and built environment. So there has to be a balance between the two. There's no point in creating new jobs if in fact you're going to simply displace jobs that are elsewhere already in town centres, and you're simply moving them from one part of a town to another, to outside it. So we fully support sustainable economic development where there is a major developer actually proposing to come in to create new jobs. But often these applications are a bit of kite flying, hopefully to attract somebody, and there is no guarantee that they will ever materialise. So I put that before you. We also have the introduction with this SPPS of community planning consultation. Local communities will be an important consideration in all local planning applications, and we will be introducing through the department the plan-led system. Now, the importance of the development plan is to be stressed here today. The last development plans that were surveyed and prepared were back in 2006, 8 years ago. And we have the latest one that has just been adopted, the Belfast Metropolitan Plan, and its lifespan is almost expired by the time that it has been adopted. Yeah. What a crazy situation that it takes nearly 10 years to get through the process from start to finish. We have to speed the whole process up. The difficulty is we have 11 councils that are coming on stream. They don't have the expertise. Many of the staff who have transferred, unlike old codgers like me, haven't been around to prepare development plans and have the expertise and experience. So what are councils going to do? Are they going to call in planning consultants to do it? Or are they going to train these staff up? They haven't got themselves geared up, therefore it could be many years before we actually see the new development plans. So we're going to be using a hand-to-mouth existence, old development plans that are out of date. I put that point to you, ladies and gentlemen. Glyn has touched on retailing, and retailing will be an important consideration in the new SPPS. It is at town centres first, and the role of town centres is clearly identified. And we do wish to see that town centres are protected and encouraged, and that's something you may want to come back to us on. The development plan system that is to be introduced makes the development plan of paramount significance. Therefore, the importance is to get those plans on stream as quickly as we can. And it has a perverse benefit. If you have a development plan system in place, legal challenges, which are a feature of many of these controversial planning decisions, Lynn has referred to 2 of them there, and these are often subject to legal challenge. Legal challenges would fade away if the development plan system has been taken through the community, through the public inquiry process, and adopted so that all parties have had their say. Then there is less likelihood of a legal challenge to arise when an application is approved in line with the development plan. Those are just some opening remarks, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take questions on the matter. Andy, is there anything you want to add?
Maybe if I could just wrap a couple of the points together. What we have is an opportunity to have a very transparent and robust planning system, and that serves all interests. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, is that some of these developments that we've talked about, where they have been granted on the basis of the economic aspects, what we have to look at is, are they speculative schemes where there isn't actually a retailer, in particular the out of town, signed up to the scheme? So therefore the jobs creation that are being hung in the balance and the weight that's been attached to them, they would only be speculative, and where there's clear displacement of the existing jobs, what that actually does is that creates a counter-traction for future investment in town centres, while the landowner is the only the benefiting party. And I think what we have to do is, where there are clear schemes, where there are policy or development plan implications, that the only way that you're going to get the robust decisions that aren't necessarily going to be challenged is to put them to a public inquiry. Because if the proposal goes against the development plan and there was no objection raised to the sites in particular, if we don't go through a public inquiry where the Planning Appeals Commission, an independent body, assesses and makes the recommendations, effectively you're not giving the public any opportunity for counter-objection. And I think that that would, bearing in mind that you've had a lot of discussion this morning on budgetary cuts, that would effectively give you better decisions that are less likely to be challenged than the associated costs. And I think that that's something that should be looked at, bearing in mind, as my colleague has said, that some of the development plans are considerably out of date. It's going to take some time to get them in order. I think that that is something that certainly the committee should be looking at, moving forward. Is that economic factors are going to be a bigger consideration, and whether those are actually speculative, or whether they're actually really going to come forward.
That's right.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Sure, I think all your doubts and all the viewpoints you gave us today, we have heard about them before, and I think you're quite right to raise these points, about SPPS being quite vague and could be up to interpretations by different councils. But I think the department has certainly assured us repeatedly that there will be a raft of regulations, guidelines, to clarify points. So, we kind of feel that perhaps they are really making things up as they go along, to really, with the time constraint now, being pushed into trying to get everything ready by the 1st of April next year. In terms of local development plan, I think there's a stipulation that they have to produce it within 3 years. Is it not? Am I right?
Yes, you're quite correct. That has been suggested in the accompanying documentation. However, I have direct experience, even with a streamlined system which was in place, it's extremely difficult to have that prepared in that timescale, to allow everyone to have their say, to consider those objections to a local plan, and then to take it through a public inquiry and to adopt the plan. All of that does take time, and you will be very fortunate to complete it in that timescale. Given that we're from a standing start almost, A, new councils, and B, little experience on board of preparing development plans, and C, the old plans will be extremely out of date. I mean, some of the existing plans for, Strabane, it's 2000 or 2001. Now, we're already 14 or 15 years out of date. By the time you get a new plan in place, you could be closer to 20 years out of date. And that is a crazy situation to be in. The department stopped effectively preparing new plans in 2006. It didn't have the resources to do that. Are the new councils going to be any better equipped, I asked the question.
Okay. Hopefully they're not starting from brand new position. They can look back at the old existing strategies. Yes, I know they may be out of date, but still. But as you said, you don't want to see situations whereby, like BMAP is taking 15 years for it to produce, and when it's produced, whether there may be a legal challenge on it too, whether is it worth it? It's going to be only another 5 years until it expires. So it is important to have the development plan, yes, well consulted and comprehensive. But that time element, I think, is important because, as you said yourself, all the planning applications should flow from the master plan for the development. But I certainly would want to ask the department about your queries on Article 31, because it is clearly,
yes.
Clearly Article 31 should remain within the department and that particular category. So we will ask the department on that question about clear definition of what should be Article 31. As you said, there are 3 categories. So, we'll ask. I'll bring in other members. Members, we still have one more briefing, and that's on the amendment bill, road traffic amendment bill. Peter.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'd agree with a reasonable part of it. I'll just echo the Chair's point. I think it'd be very useful. I appreciate there's not time now, but if you get us the more detailed information on the Article 31s, would be very helpful, because it seems to me that what is not necessarily the case of them, if you like, shifting the goalposts, at least in terms of whether there are articles, it's what they're interpreting and from a practical point of view as to whether things fall into categories. And if there's been if the headline, if you like, is still the same, but actually underneath that, they're actually shifting on interpretation on that, but that would be something that would be very useful. Just to pick up just 2 points very quickly then. On the issue, just ask you to comment about, just ask both of them at the same time. You mentioned about concern over consistency, and I suppose where I maybe have a slightly different concern is there supposedly has been consistency across various planning bits when the Department and Planning Service have been doing it, but all of us on the ground have seen what seems to be wildly contrasting results in terms of applications. So to some extent, maybe that less way. To what extent does there need to be a balance with flexibility? Because Glenn mentioned at the start, which I think is a very good point, which is there's an opportunity here there's opportunities here. There's opportunity to be more proactive. And the slight danger that while there can be a good regulatory framework to try and have consistency, if you're too rigid and you don't allow enough flexibility, it may mean at council level that they almost feel that their hands are tied and can't actually go in directions perhaps that would be advantageous in that regard. So the issue of flexibility. The other point, just to ask, you mentioned in terms of the area plans, but again I can see where there's a big challenge there. There may be a big opportunity. But also, I mean, let's acknowledge, and I think you have to a certain extent, this is replacing, if you like, the current system. The current system doesn't appear in terms of area planning particularly to be working. Coming from somebody who, and potentially still within the courts, one aspect of it anyway, coming from somebody who's waited probably since the fall of the Berlin Wall virtually for BMAP to emerge. I'm slightly exaggerating, but to be honest, it's not that far off it. We seem to have had the central regulation in terms of producing area plans has been so torturous and long that clearly that system isn't working. And I suppose the other point just in relation to that is, I appreciate, and this is maybe the bit where you're right in terms of outcomes on processes, we seem to have got ourselves in part, both in terms of process and mindset, with here's a process of producing an area plan or producing that has got to go through so many stages and have so many times that it almost becomes impossible to reach that. And maybe we also need, as much as anything, a change of mindset, as well as much as a change of process, to actually say our parts of the world, other parts of the UK can actually turn around regular area plans within like a 3-year period and that type of thing. We seem to have got ourselves bogged down that everything seems to take forever in Northern Ireland. Again, that may not be unique in that regard. And as much as anything else in terms of production of area plans, it does need to be something in terms of change of mindset. But just after you comment on those couple of...
Well, I mean, I think your point about consistency, I mean, local councils aside, the current Environment Minister, there's a complete inconsistency in decisions that he's made. For instance, rejecting all 4 out-of-town applications in Marfelt, but yet allowing major out-of-town developments to go through in Uri and Strabane. So you perhaps don't need to wait to the super councils to make those decisions. Those bad decisions have already been made. So we do need to see a consistency of approach from the DOE to these applications, and certainly we hope that is the case, that these councils will stick to the strong town centre first planning policy that is outlined, and we hope that is very much the case. And that forms the basis of the presentations that we've been doing to the shadow councils at the minute and our ongoing meetings with the chief executives. I'll maybe ask Des to come in on the broader area planning process, but you also have a whole raft of town centre master plans as well. As you know from Bangor, there's a Bangor town centre master plan. What happens to those master plans, come the transfer as well? A lot of those master plans have no legal standing in planning terms, so they can be set aside and are no material worth in planning terms. So I think it'll be interesting to see what process the councils go down in that respect. But also what we've been trying to do is not just, is sort of capacity build with a lot of the town-based chambers that are out there, because they will really come into their own with the super councils. And we've been encouraging them to work together, to cluster together, make sure that they are engaging, working with their super council. Because I think in the area planning process, in terms of key stakeholders, the local chambers will have an absolutely vital, crucial role there to play in terms of giving that private sector voice. One of the things that we put forward in our report is that we'd like to see each council establish what we call a growth partnership, and that's very much not just key people in the private sector, but also key people from the FE sector and so on as well, that will be working together with the council. We believe that that would be a very useful body of ensuring the councils in the private sector are working hand in glove, and that there is effective consultation and planning before they strike rates and so on. So the key thing there is there's a lot of relationships that need to be sort of built and recast. But the biggest thing, it is that culture change, and that is the biggest, and that will be the big, and one of the things that as I've been speaking to a lot of the shadow councils, one thing's very clear, there doesn't seem to be a great enthusiasm by councillors to get on the planning committee, or even the shadow planning committee. And it's always a case of careful what you wish for. But so I think that that's a culture change, because they will move from a situation where they're currently lobbyists to the lobbied, or sorry, they're moved from the lobbyists to being the lobbied. I think I did get that right. And that's a big culture change for them, where they've got to stand over decisions they make in their local communities. And hopefully, if we get the regeneration powers over in 2016, off-street car parking, that these councils really could be the local change makers. I've said to this committee before, the big frustration that we have is that you have town centre responsibilities scattered across 4 different departments, and certainly it would make it a lot easier to get things done when a lot of these powers go to the super council. So instead of 3 or 4 different ministers, we're probably dealing with the right relevant official or council chairman.
Thanks, Glyn. And just on that point, those of us who maybe have longer memories than others, but I recall the Department of the Environment was originally the Ministry of Development, and they used to refer to it as the Department of Everything. And when the department covered all these 4 town centre functions, it was certainly an opportunity for getting things done in those early days. But with the columnar administration we have at the moment, things never seem to. They go up before they come across to come down again. However, turning to the Article 31s for just a second, Mr Weir, you raised the point about inconsistency, and certainly to have an Article 31 on the same site in the same town, and it declared 6 years before because it was contrary to a development plan, affected the whole of a neighbourhood or locality, and altered a major trunk road scheme. On 3 triggers, it was in Article 31, and to not apply 31 now does appear to be a department that has changed its tune and is not in line with the way the legislation has been drawn up before we ever get there. We can certainly give you details of that and other cases.
Appreciate time is tight.
Can you write to me or the clerk, and then
Absolutely.
we can put it forward to the department?
Community planning, we believe, offers a great opportunity where if people can get in and groups and express their views early on applications, often that may help cut down some of the frustrations that are found at a later stage. And I just touch on your master plans. Those have no status, and Glyn has rightly referred to that. They are largely from DSD, they have emanated, but there is no structure within the development plan that they are a material consideration. And so councils are going to have to deal with the rationalisation of those in the future. I'll just touch on those 2 or 3 points. Andy?
If I take your point just on the hands tied and the rigid situation, I mean, obviously current legislation allows that you have regard for the development plan. It's not like in the mainland where it has to be in compliance, so there's a degree of flexibility. But I think the point that I was making before is that certainly it's about weighing up the balance. And if you're sitting there and you've got a committed development and people committed to the jobs and that's there, then that needs to be considered, of course. I think the difference is what we have is we have landowners trying to add value to their land in a speculative way, where there's and maybe that's...
I suppose my concern in terms of when I'm talking about flexibility is that with the best one word leave aside just whether it's an application sort of somewhere in the countryside. I mean, you know, the needs of potentially a Macrofelt will be different from a Belfast, will be different from a, and there needs to be, whereas yes, there needs to be a sort of consistent backcloth. However, I think it can't be that rigid that it does.
That perhaps may be the function of the development plan. We keep coming back to that. If the plan were in place, then that sets the backcloth, and you can determine your applications in line with that plan.
That would allow for growth. It would look at population, it would look at floor space that's available, committed developments that are already granted, and that gives you the background to say, okay, well, listen, this is what we're predicting for the length of the plan, this is what we need, and that is going to be unique according to each area, of course it is.
Okay, thank you. Alban.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your very interesting series of submissions. A lot of health warnings there for us as a committee, and I take them on board. The Article 31 and the inconsistency, potential inconsistency that there might be in relation to the local councils. BMAP, do you welcome BMAP's publication?
Well, I think that, yes, and I think that obviously within BMAP is a very strong town centre first, running right throughout it. I think that we did say at the time it would be good if the executive as a whole could get behind an agreed BMAP, and obviously with the current court case that the Minister for Enterprise has taken forward shows that obviously there's not that consensus there, but we are very, very clear in terms of ensuring that there is a strong town centre first planning policy, which BMAP obviously has in there. But it's important we do get a consistent, it's important we do get the executive as a whole behind BMAP, so there might need to be some tailorings into it, but in terms of its central focus, in terms of town centre first, we would be supportive, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Just in relation to the overall state of the retail trade, you did refer to a high level of vacancies and properties in throughout Northern Ireland. In various towns. Have you any idea of the extent of that? Can you measure it in percentage terms?
Yes.
Can you compare it to England or Wales?
We're looking at just below 20%. I think certainly that decline has stabilised in recent years, but we still have a very, very serious problem with shop vacancies, and that's why the top of the list for the new super councils is actually having a coherent vacancy strategy. But they sit down and do an audit of their vacant space in their town centre, sit down and think, what are we going to use this vacant space for? Is it going to be for further retail development? Could it be for community use? Could it be some other thing? As long as that there's a strategy there to deal with it, because every new business that starts up in a town centre, there's a multiplier effect.
Yes.
I was in Lanyon House yesterday, or the day before rather, talking to having a meeting about the rates revaluation. That's a fantastic example where actually you have a government department has located an agency in Belfast city centre, and the local shops around that area are doing a roaring trade with all the civil servants that are there. So that's why we want to see town centre first, not just in retail, but in all major applications, because as DSD constantly going about, that is the biggest multiplier effect you get in any sort of investment, because it boosts footfall, and it helps the businesses that are around there, and is the greater multiplier effect, and addresses the shop vacancy issue at the same time. And that's why that obviously we're very keen that the Department of Finance continues the empty rate relief premises scheme, which has created nearly 350 new businesses, whereby a new start business only pays 50% rates in their first year. That scheme has worked exceptionally well, and that's something we strongly lobby for, and something we hope the Finance Minister will build on. And it goes to the example that town centres are scattered across 4 or 5 different departments, and one of the other key things that we need to develop, and this will be a big policy priority for us in the coming year, is village development, because we go on a lot about town and city centres, but we forget about our villages. And that's about as much an action point for us as it is for the Assembly and for the super councils.
Can I just ask one final question then, just in relation to the state of the retail trade? How do you judge it? I mean, you're all involved in the trade. You must have an idea of how the trade is going throughout Northern Ireland. There will obviously be variations from town to town. So forth.
I think certainly consumer confidence has improved. People are spending more. And I hope that this Christmas we'll see real clear evidence of that. We have some way to go before we have a locked-in sustainable recovery in Northern Ireland. It is very shaky recovery, but we're getting there. I think things are certainly in a better situation. And of course, one of the big changes in retail has been the growth of multiple retail visits. So the days of the big weekly shop and the fortnightly big shop are in decline now. People are doing multiple shopping trips, and that is people now are using more independent retailers for that purpose. So things in retail terms are moving in the direction of independent retail at long last, and the days of the big boxes are certainly in decline now, but things are picking up. And I think one of the things that we always say about the retail sector, people shouldn't forget, it is our largest part of our private sector economy. 1 in 10 jobs in Northern Ireland are in retail. So we have a big contribution to play in the recovery. As you'll see in the report, we have set ambitious targets. We want to see the Executive and the 11 super councils creating the conditions for 3,000 new independent retailers by 2020, because we probably lost that amount in the recession. So we want to be ambitious, and we want to help that next generation of retail entrepreneurs, and that's very much where we're focusing. So initiatives like Small Business Saturday, had to get the plug in, of course, are not just about our existing independent retailers and small business, but actually they're signposting the independent retailers of tomorrow, and it's how we can help spark that entrepreneurship amongst the next generation is absolutely key. Some of the best innovation you will see is in independent retail, because they don't get the grants in Europe, they don't get a lot of the support from Invest Northern Ireland. That is changing, so they have to rely on themselves. And so the best innovation that I would repeat is in the independent, because their backs are against the wall, so they've got to change and adapt. And the old maxim is that the only constant in retail is change.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. Cathal?
Thanks, Chair, and I will try and be brief, Chair, because I'm mindful of the time. But then you hit it on the head. It's a combination of factors. Departments, let's be realistic. But I'm just putting my planning hat on me here and how this is going to impact, to be honest. And I'm just wondering, with the process of the new statement of community involvement, as you know yourself, planning is about land use, and it's up to those people from the start to get in, get involved in the process. And you know, zone land for whatever use that is, be it residential, industrial or whatever. So we're not going to, white land, you name it, whatever, there's an opportunity. You're in the business, we all know about it, so let's get that. But the problem I do have, and I recognise Article 31 is a major issue, we need to look at that, because that's a separate thing, and keep that out of there. The likes of Sprucefield, Belfast and Derry, region significance, that's a different matter, keep it out of there. But we have good opportunities on the local development plan. Now, I certainly have reservations about the SPP, yes, myself, but I think that I want to ask you this, in terms of, surely the statement of community involvement is a good starting point for all of this.
Yes.
I wouldn't say, I know the area plans we have now are out of date, I wouldn't say that there hasn't been a good body of work that has been done that will be part of the process. But what am I missing here? I mean, I know you're concerned about Article 31's protecting the town centres, but I think you can very easily do that in terms of gearing business towards town centres, zoning land for certain purposes. So I'm wondering what the gap is, or where I'm missing. Where do you specifically see it? Is it the Article 31 issue, or?
I think the biggest area of concern is consistency. That's the thing that worries me, probably. Certainly community involvement, we would urge all groups, all organisations to get in at the grassroots and get involved in the process. And that can only but be helpful to involve all the stakeholders. So we welcome that without any doubt. The important thing is you cannot come back at a later stage after the plan has been formulated and say, oh, we weren't consulted. You have everyone who's getting an opportunity at an early stage. I think where we find the biggest difficulty is, and I saw this before the department took over, is different councils have different interpretations of policies. And this SPPS is much more generalised. It's not going to drill down into the detail of the present policy. Therefore, interpretations are likely to be different. So that's why it's so essential to have the development plan process in place, and that we can get a measure of consistency across the board.
And hopefully working with local authorities can do that. And just picking up on that point, and I want to say it, Lynn, before you say it, in terms, I know you said councils are reluctant to go on to planning authorities. Mostly rural councils are reluctant to go on to planning authorities. But I just want to pick up on a quick point you mentioned, because this is important. As part of our whole process in the Planning Act, we talked about job displacement.
Yep.
And for a developer to prove in their business case on that whole process that the impact of displacement was a major issue for you. You're saying you have reservations over that. That's why we brought that forward.
Yeah, I've reservations because, and I'm not going to go into specific details of some of the decisions, obviously because they're subject to challenge, but I have severe reservations when I'm reading a report that's accepting and acknowledging a 50% displacement, right, in the existing town centre, so 50% of existing jobs for a scheme where some of the employment is speculative. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So I think what I'm saying is, let's look. Glyn said the big boxes are over. Tesco's aren't looking to roll out the stores. Sainsbury's and Justin King have made their position very clear after Dundonald Rolls-Royce. So Asda is there, but unless there's any new, and this is specifically on the out-of-town retailing, unless there's any new entrants, a lot of these schemes are speculative. They're for the landowner to take their land, get a permission, and that adds value to it. But those jobs aren't in the off at any stage soon. And I think that's the point I'm making, is the threat that then hangs over the town centre by the grant of that permission will live on for the legacy of that permission. It won't go away, and it will prevent investment in the town centres. And I think that's the point, that for these speculative jobs that we are holding up in such weight, the likelihood of them coming forward, I'm a little bit cynical, and I think we need to. There's an opportunity there to say, well, listen, this is not a speculative scheme. We have committed retailers. It's committed, and here are the jobs.
Surely, if you're in the front line and you're arguing them points, when somebody comes in with a business case, you'll be all around the table. Those people involved in the process.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. Is the earlier engagement, because delay is a tactic that's used, that we all use, and it's used regularly. And I think if you can get all the competing interests round the table early, allow them an opportunity, you're going to remove that commercial delay tactic and the commercial disadvantages, and get everything teased out at an early stage, which may allow the aspirational 3 years for development plans to come forward.
As long as it's a policy to do nothing as opposed to a policy to build and grow, because there's a great expectation and aspiration coming out of local authority, when they take over.
Yeah.
But thanks, Charlie. I'll leave it at that. We could talk all day about it, but I'll leave it.
Okay. Lord Morrow.
Chair, could I first of all apologise to Glenn and his team for missing their presentation, and it was just something else that I had to attend to, and I regret. This is a general question. Glenn, I would like to ask you, in relation to our town centres, is it a case that retailers are giving up on our town centres now that the big groups have moved in and they're on the periphery of our towns or on our best sites, as someone once said? Do you think that we could be facing the death of our town centres by 1,000 cut?
Maybe I was a bit more pessimistic maybe 2 years ago, but I'm much more optimistic now. I think it is about a radically different vision of our town centres, which are not just retail, but retail, hospitality, community use, arts use, that are a vibrant mix of them all. And I suppose what we're trying to do is put the social into shopping, make town centres fun, places that people want to visit time and time again. There's nothing fun about pushing a big trolley around a big supermarket, but there is something fun to have a vibrant town centre which has a good mix of retail, both independent and multiple, great coffee shops, great restaurants. So it's how we make them town centres fun places and living communities as well, getting people living in their town centres as well. So that's the big challenge, and I think that argument is now gaining momentum. Because people want something different than the same old big chains. They want something different. And have you seen that, for instance, in recent years, butchers in particular have gone through a renaissance, where people trust their local butcher. So it's about building in all of that there. So it is a much more radical model than previous years. And quite often I get asked questions, you know, is my job about managing decline? And I'd say no, it's not. It's about managing the future. It's about managing the transition. And I'd say that quite often the biggest change actually is not even in policy terms, but it's the mindset of our members to embrace change, to embrace social media, to embrace the digital era, to use online, to see online as an opportunity, not as a threat. So I think there is potential there. And, you know, I was in Dungannon there the other week, and hopefully when you get your public realm finished, that will transform the town. So I think it is about, and we've formed a very close working relationship with our colleagues in Pubs of Ulster, because it is very much about that vision of a fun town centre, great shops, great bars, great restaurants, and something that people want to come back time and time again. And I think that's where, in one sense, that why Tesco in particular now have moved away from the big boxes and are building smaller format stores that are in high streets and town centres. And I think that because they realise that's the way consumers are going, because they want to see town centres that are vibrant. We've an awful lot of work to do. There's so many town centres that are in a bad situation. I'm not going to list them today, but that's why that we produced this detailed report, 80-point plan for our 11 councils, because we believe with the right policy, the right teamwork, the right joined-up approach, we can turn the situation around. We can address the vacancy rate. And that's why getting planning right and getting town centre first in terms of planning policy is so important to our town centres. But it's not the only thing. It's getting rates right, it's getting transport right, it's getting infrastructure right. It's about all of those things coming together, and car parking. And, you know, we were giving evidence to your colleagues in the Regional Development Committee a few weeks ago about the off-street car parking bill going down. That's crucial. We want to see, for instance, on-street transferring at some point. We want to see local roads, all of that transfer, but that's maybe a second-term issue for the councils.
Chair, you just got in ahead of me on car parking, because I see that too as vital to the whole infrastructure and what happens around it. But the one consistency that seems to be prevalent in towns that you've got, for instance, well, let's draw, you draw attention to Dungannon. Up until recently, if you want to park in Dungannon, you paid for it, but you could go across to Cookstown and know it's all free. Now, there is something inconsistent here. Now, I know it has changed slightly in this respect, that the traders in Dungannon took the initiative and went on to them, and I think to some degree it has helped. But the perception is still out there, well, you go to Cookstown, it's free. You go to Craigavon, it's free. If you go to Dungannon, you pay. Now, once that sort of mindset and message gets out, where, you know, you're not going to go to those towns where you have to pay. And I see parking, on-street parking and off-street parking. Now, Dungannon's not difficult, well, Dungannon's difficult in this respect. It's built on a hill. When it was being built, it was built in the wrong place, you know. But I suspect we're not going to be able to change that.
Could have built it in Cookstown.
Yeah. So therefore, once you leave a car park practically in Dungannon, you must start climbing hills and stuff like that, with the exception of the new, recently created one at Castle Hill. Yes. And to get the space to create new car parks is not a simple task, because you must take away something, put a car, and then you're taking away a part of your town centre.
If I could maybe, I mean, there's certain times you're quite right identifying that you're in competition with each other to a certain degree. I think the thing I would say is look at the towns that are doing it well. They've got a very broad mix of independent retailers along with multinationals and convenience food stores in the town centre. You know, if I look at the Asda in Bangor, for example, it's in the town centre. You can park there, you get your parking back. So you don't park there all day if you shop in the store, and you have the linked trips and the footfall, which, as Glenn has mentioned, where everybody's working together. And I think that's the sort of approach where, not saying that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but that's how you would encourage car parking and start to bring it all together. And I think that's what we really need to be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, I think that obviously this will be a big issue. I know I've discussed with your Newspaper Council Chief Executive, and that is something that is in his in-tray, so to speak. But that's why we were so particular about ensuring we got the 5 hours for £1 parking scheme over the line, and because it was very much about putting that marker down to the super councils. That we have said that the minimum we would expect the super councils to do when off-street transfers is to maintain that 5 hours for £1. And you also have, like, for instance, and I've noticed a couple of towns have done this for Small Business Saturday, is that they've completely waived their car parking fees on that particular Saturday. So what it does is enables councils to have that little bit more flexibility. But it's also not just about getting car parking, it's also about getting public transport right as well. It's about ensuring that, for instance, that we have, if people want to cycle, if they want to walk, if they want to use the bus, if they want to bring their car, that they have that choice and flexibility to do it. But I do think that getting car parking right is an essential, and I think we've made progress with the 5 hours for £1, and we've encouraged the Minister to continue that right up to the end of March, just before transfer. So it really puts it up to the super councils. Look, carry. Just continue this on. There's no great rocket science here. Continue this on. I think that's the minimum. And if they want to waive car parking fees at special times at Christmas, then they've got that flexibility to do that.
Asking for the money to refurbish the car parks?
Well, we actually have we made that point in terms of the maintenance of the car parks in our evidence to your colleagues in the Regional Development Committee. So that is an issue there about DFP top slicing. Because obviously these councils will have to maintain and run these car parks, so that is an issue that we have flagged up to the Regional Development Minister. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just, Glenn, you referred to the mindsets of, certainly town centre and certainly independent retailers. How do you change the mindset of a independent retailer who, when it came to the economic downturn, sort of took the opinion, well, my grandfather came through this in his day, my father came through something like it in his day, and I'm going through it, and I'm not going to change anything. If they didn't have to change anything, why should I change anything? How do you change the mindsets of people who don't see the need to, I'm saying necessarily move with the times, but change their mindsets around how they do their business and try and compete, instead of blaming the local council because the rates have went up by 1%, or there's nothing being done, and no matter how much you spend in the town centres, and I know that things have been done. So, speak from a Cookstown perspective, there's the Living Over the Shop scheme, which was probably one of the most successful of those schemes across Northern Ireland. And I suppose you can only do so much, and you can put so much work in, whether it's doing up the front and helping independent retailers do get the funding to do up the front of their shops. But if they're not willing to make changes within their own business structures because they think, well, it was okay, 50, 100 years ago, they didn't have to do anything, so why should I? How do you change that mindset?
Well, I think that's a very simple question to answer, and you've all got your tablets in front of you. And it's simple that I see that there's a big change now, and that is online. And I think that mindset is solely changing, where they used to see online as a threat. Now, increasingly, a lot of our members are seeing it as an opportunity, where even if they don't sell online, they can certainly market online. They can use, it costs nothing to use Twitter. Increasingly, the big explosion in the last year of our members using Twitter. So every time they have a new product, they have a new sale or whatever that they're tweeting, they're communicating, because it won't be people buying on laptops, it'll be people buying through apps on their phone. There's a PayPal app now that is already, so that sort of change they need to run. They need to be in the forefront, and we believe that the digital high street agenda is something that is very friendly to town centres, because it's not just assuming that the future of the retail sector will be big warehouses posting out stuff. It is that strong, vibrant cafe culture town centre where people, where businesses actually have well-run shops, but they may be doing 20–30% of their sales online. They're constantly communicating to customers, and obviously Marfelt is a good example of that, where Marfelt was the first town centre in Northern Ireland to have its own app, which works exceptionally well. A good way to communicate, not just in terms of what retailers, but cinema times, bus times, all of that. And that's why that sort of cutting-edge change is because if you stand still in retail, you are dead. There's no ifs, no buts. No one owes any of our members a living. They really have to change and adapt, and I think that is where that's this and it's keeping up with that pace of change. And I think that in one sense with Tesco is that Tesco always was very nimble in adapting to change. Now they can't they find themselves in what's their next move? And I think that the future is independent retail. The future is well-run local independent shops that source stuff locally, that work in that family of town, within the family of businesses, that ecosystem of businesses in town centres. And I think that's probably why Tesco are building the smaller format stores, because they think they want a slice of the action. The decline in the big weekly shop is key, because that, I think, really, it was declining for some years, but it came to a head in the recession where consumers realised they were wasting an awful lot of food in a weekly and fortnightly shop. Yeah. So the recession really has changed that. So consumers watching the pounds and pennies, and they realise now that it's very simple. The way home to grab something for the evening meal, or there may be two visits to a local shop. They can get the, and if you look at the likes of Tesco and Asda and Sainsbury's, aren't really built for convenience. They're built for this big 1980s big shop which is declining fast. So it's a rapidly changing situation. And that's why we believe that there is huge growth potential now within the independent retail sector. That's why that we need that next generation of retail entrepreneurs to come forward.
It hasn't been mentioned, but I know it's something came up in the Finance Committee around the number of charity shops that are open in town centres, and obviously people are using the fact that they, the rates more so than anything else as a reason to have an increased number of charity shops. And I'm not against charity shops, but I know there is a view. I know some independent retailers who take issue with the number and the increased number of charity shops that have opened because it has that impact on their business. They're an important part of society as well, an important part of that business structure. But have you a view on?
I think that obviously that they get rate free because it's conditional. I think if they go over that line and become almost too commercial, where they're almost competing with established retailers in the town that pay the rates and pay all the other bills, then they have crossed the line. I think what you've seen is that, in a funnier sense, the recession has funded the growth of charity shops in a lot of ways, where people didn't have the money. They were more open to buying second-hand furniture, second-hand clothes or whatever. But the biggest, I think that the one group that has the biggest concern about it is charity shops themselves. And I know, as a former board member of Oxfam Ireland, I know the big concern, explosion of charity shops that are there. They have their role, but I think if too much of any good thing is a bad thing, and I think if we get the situation where charity shops dominate the retail landscape in town centres, then we have a problem. But the charity shops and the charities themselves would be the first to say there are too many charity shops, because ultimately that they have a cake and they can only subdivide it so much. But they have their role, they have their place. But but I think that we have got to a point where there are far too many, and they themselves are seeing that income drop. And of course, you've got lots of companies now that are taking second-hand clothes and paying people for them. And that's, I know, is a big threat. In my time in Oxfam, the retail people in Oxfam were saying that's a big threat to them. So, but that type of retail also has to change into that.
There is a way that you could control the proliferation of charity shops. And we were talking earlier about preparation of development plans. And most town centres have identified a core commercial area. And certainly a policy could be written into those plans locally to preclude the location of charity shops in that commercial core, so that they are pushed out from the core of town centres to a little bit further out, where they still have a presence, but without dominating the landscape of retail centres.
Okay, Ian, I mean, there are a few charity shops in Hollywood. I moved to Hollywood last year. It's a lovely town, really vibrant. Lots of restaurants, cafes, and yes, charity shops, but Tesco's there, and it's super. I love walking down it. Shouldn't be spending money going around the shops, but it's a lovely town, really beautiful town.
Nothing looks as good or great as Cookstown.
Do you want us to write that in the policy? Yeah. Okay.
No, but it should be replicated. really very good. And
Chair,
you've got packing.
Chair,
good
that's
packing.
it. There's certain towns that are doing it very well around Northern Ireland. I'm not going to name them all as you are, but I think that should be, yes, okay, income and household income in each of these towns is different and varied, but I think let's look at the ones that are doing it well. What's working well for them cannot be replicated into the other towns, and that's the approach that we're kind of encouraging. Let's differentiate, see what we're doing well and how we can move that forward, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming. And members, right, we need to seek your agreement. We have Ian Greenway waiting all morning outside. He is quite keen to do this, but I'm aware of the time, and members have to go to your next commitment at 2 o'clock. I mean, we can put it to next week. Now, next week's going to be the Minister's briefing and the EU briefing, is
Well, we
there?
could maybe postpone the EU briefing.
We maybe can postpone the
I'd
EU
say that
briefing.
we'd stick with the stuff that is, I mean, the Minister and I suppose the more urgent stuff of the bill next week, if we can try and do that.
So if we just postpone, apologise to Ian, we'll do that next week then. Still time enough.
Oh, no, apologising today, sir.
Okay, members, then we're quickly then going to finish today's business then. We can then jump on now to correspondence, okay, members? At page 429 you have a list of correspondence there. You members, you content to note item 16.2 to 16.8, okay. Just one to mention to you all as item 16.1, and that's at page 430, and there's correspondence from the Education Committee regarding community planning. Members, you content to forward the letter to the department?
Great.
Okay, asking for a copy of synopsis of responses to consultation on community planning to be forwarded to the Education Committee. Okay, forward work programme is at page 449. Okay, members, are you content to note?
Great.
AOB, I've got a note from Barry, and he's saying that EC Link and Community Transport Association is paying a visit to Parliament Building next Tuesday on the 2nd of December between 12 midday and 2 p.m. They are going to be in room 342. We'll make repeat presentations on their key issues, including the social car scheme at 12:30 and 1:15 p.m. So he would like to encourage all members to attend, and perhaps request that a committee secretariat or staff member to attend and report back to next week's meeting. So I'll try my best to turn up, but members, you agree that the committee secretariat staff to go there? Okay, and that's all. Is that right from him? Yep. Okay. No other ALBs, members?
Thank you.
Okay, then next meeting, same time, same place next week. Okay, just remind you the minister's coming.